Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Cinematic Realms. I'm your host, Gwen, and with me, as always, is Jared. How are you doing today, Jared?
I'm doing great. As we were talking before the stream, it was a busy weekend, a lot of exciting developments, but tiring at times. And it was I was looking forward to this from all week, basically, since the end of our last discussion, and I can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, I have to say that yesterday was a bit of a journey. I was doing pretty good earlier in the day, and then as the day went on, it was not the greatest. There's probably some doom scrolling to thank for that. And I should know better by this point, but I was ready to have a sort of rejuvenation today, and this movie really did it. It just brought my soul back into like alignment, and and yeah, I'm trying to think. I think this is probably the first time I've seen the film since we did our watch party. Although I think I've watched like clips. When you go down the YouTube rabbit hole and you end up watching clips from your favorite movies. I've seen a couple, a number of times from this one, and so just getting to watch it again from beginning to end was just so amazing and so healing, and I have a feeling it's gonna be that way many times in the future, in the same way that movies like The Princess Bride and Stardust have filled that that space for me. I think that this is bit by bit becoming one of those films. And to make it easier for me, I mean, it's easy enough. It's on Disney Plus, for God's sake. But but go with me. To make it easier for me, I've now made sure that it's added to my actual collection, which is I have ordered the 4K Blu-ray combo pack off of eBay, and will be getting it sometime in the next week, as well as the soundtrack CD, which I ordered as well. Even though, and I will say that I really wish it had the rendition of the song in the film. I don't even know what the song is actually called. Is it Lavender Green or
Green or lavender blue? Dilly dilly.
I wish that it had that song on the soundtrack, whether it was a rendition by Hayley Atwell or Lily James, preferably both. But you can't have everything, and the rest of the music is just so gloriously beautiful that I will be happy to have it sitting on my shelf. And it came out back in the days when soundtrack CDs were still a regular thing. So luckily that they can still be tracked down. But yeah, so I'm just so excited to talk about this today. It's going to be amazing. And in case y'all haven't figured it out yet, we're talking about the 2015 version of Cinderella, directed by one Kenneth Branagh.
No, I have been waiting for this for a long time, because, to be honest, this is one of my all-time favorite movies. Not just like my favorite of the so-called genre of Disney live-action remake classics, which we will get also touch on, but this is just a great movie in and of its own right. And as you had mentioned earlier, this is a movie that has the power to heal my soul. Frankly, it is not an overstretch to say that like it is one of the movies that whenever I'm feeling perhaps sad or stressed or down, and I don't want to lean into it by watching another movie like Alien, this is one of the movies I will go to. it really kind of occupies a space alongside movies that you mentioned, like The Princess Bride, or another classic touchstone for me, Pride and Prejudice, and for you, is in a movie that makes you want to believe in love, believe in the power of empathy and kindness and goodness and courage, and just overall the sensation that if you put those things into practice in the world will show them to you. And this is a movie that believes that philosophy wholeheartly. It is, for that reason, not a movie for the cynics. If you perhaps want somebody who is like, I want my movies to have a harder edge. I want my movies to, lean into the darkness and the pain of the real world and show characters finding their way through that. You may not agree directly with this movie's, more hopeful, optimistic outlook, but I think that you should give it a chance if so, because frankly, this is not a movie that believes those tenets blindly. The story of Cinderella is obviously a story of tremendous adversity. What Cinderella goes through in every version of the tale at the hands of her stepmother and her stepsisters and just the world in general is terrible. But the reason that this movie is so powerful and why she is so powerful and enduring as a heroine of this classic tale is because she never allows it to turn her heart. And that is something that I just find so incredibly inspiring in every version of the story, but never more so than in this version. Because as portrayed by Lily James and in the screenplay by Chris Weitz and then the direction by Kenneth Branagh and the music by Patrick Doyle, we will be gushing about, this is a movie that wears its heart not just on its sleeve, but throws open its chest and just welcomes you in if you're open to it. And I very much have opened my heart to it. And so every single time I revisit it, it rewards me more and more and more. And I just fall deeper and deeper in love with it.
Yeah, I will say that if you're not open to hope and true love and optimism, you probably shouldn't be watching a Disney movie. But also, yeah, I want to do this is kind of a left field, callback, but I had it back when Twitter still existed. I had a GIF as my pinned post on my page. And it was actually from something that I still to this day have not yet seen, because I've only really started my journey into Doctor Who. But it was from the scene in which Peter Capaldi's Doctor is saying farewell before he gets transformed into Jodie Whittaker. And he just simply says, "Be kind." And the reason why I had that on my page, and I'll probably have it sooner or later on Blue Sky as well. Right now I've got a very nice Gandalf scene from The Hobbit. But it's just, if it doesn't always win out, it's always my intended philosophy in life. To be kind. And that's not be kind when it suits you or be kind when things are going well. It's a rule to apply to your everyday life. And I think that's why, and that's the message of this movie. And it's not only to be kind, but to have courage and be kind. And I think that that's such a difficult thing to do. And certainly throughout the film, Cinderella has to, struggle a lot to keep with that. And there's even one part of the movie, and we'll talk about, where she breaks down, just sort of on the edge of giving up on that, because it is very hard. but to watch her get through that and to overcome so much, it's why this is such a beautiful film. And yeah, and plus, love and romance. And you know what? Again, if you're cynical, it's not for you. This movie, certainly made strides in sort of fleshing out the the quote unquote Cinderella story. But at the end of the day, it is still very much two people falling in love and happily ever after. So if you're not there for that, that's fine, to each their own. But I am absolutely here for that, with my storytelling in general, but especially with this film. So by the end of the movie today, I was just I was just in pieces, and I was so like happy and overjoyed, and it's such a beautiful film. I think with really powerful messages and hope, and and so it's exactly the type of thing that I need when I'm down and out, and when I'm not. So yeah.
I mean, if you'll permit me to draw a few connections to other pop culture touchstones, there are, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, especially this year, as the world has taken some darker turns, is the very idea of kindness and empathy, and what it takes to still live those values even when the world is doing everything it can to tell you not to. And I think about, there's going to be a Superman movie coming out in July, directed by James Gunn, and his pitch for it, for his new take on Superman, is the idea of he's basically a hero who believes in kindness in a world that increasingly thinks kindness is old-fashioned, and it is an old-fashioned notion. That is what fairy tales often are, but that they're one of the things that Kenneth Branagh quotes in his behind-the-scenes commentary on this movie is the idea that this is a movie where kindness is a superpower. It is Cinderella's superpower. And she does not come by it, just because it was bestowed upon her. It's because she practices it every day. And in doing so, her kindness, her empathy allows her to save her world. This is a lower stakes story, but one of the reasons I'm wearing my, Wonder Woman t-shirt today in that idea is that it's, she is like Cinderella is a heroine in the classic sense, but she is not the most traditional heroine that we have come to, well, she is a very traditional heroine, but she is not, she does not pick up a sword in this movie. She does not go into battle against, the forces who are trying to oppress her. Interestingly, when Disney was developing this story, they actually were originally taking pitches, and some of the writers were pitching a version that was more like that, where it's like, actually, let's make a more modern Cinderella who is like not just a damsel in distress, but it can actually like handle herself with a sword and go out and, fight against the people who are trying to take her down. And I'm like, that is an incredibly admirable and awesome story, but it's not really the classic version of Cinderella that we know, and more and more as the development process went on, they realized that, and they realized they needed to stick to the classic tenets of the tale, but they also needed to update it for a modern audience. It is notable that in a year we're talking about big anniversaries. The original animated version of Cinderella, the Disney version, came out in 1950. So this year it is celebrating its 75th anniversary. It was celebrating its 65th 10 years ago. And in many respects, we have evolved a great deal since then. And a lot of the elements that are present in that original movie, classic though it is, that we'll touch on throughout the course of this stream, are not elements that are necessarily going to translate as well to a modern audience. But how do you do that without necessarily, completely transforming Cinderella as a character? Well, this movie does it. And it does it by just committing to the belief of, like, yes, Cinderella is, she may not have, the greatest physical strength or the greatest, courage on the battlefield or skill with weaponry, but her spirit is unbreakable. And she is, whatever else she goes through, as I mentioned earlier, she never allows it to turn her heart. She always makes the active choice to be better. And even if it means, that she sometimes doesn't see those rewards right away, she does it because it's who she is, and it's because it's what she believes. And ultimately, as we learn in the movie's opening, is because what she promised her mother she would always do. And as she goes through adversity, I think back to another fantasy that has some connections to this movie for understandable reasons, a darker tone fantasy, Game of Thrones, shares a few actors. And I think about the famous quote, the much beloved quote that, funnily enough, Robb Stark, in the TV show at least, and Ned Stark in the book says, which is the idea that how can a man be brave when he's afraid? That is the only time a man can be brave. And in this movie, how can a woman who is going through incredible pain and indignity and unfairly be courageous and be kind when it's hard? Because she chooses to, because it is hard, she makes the harder choice to live those values. And in the end, because this is a fairy tale, she is rewarded for it. And in doing so, across the entire course of her journey, she transforms pretty much almost every character she meets for the better. And again, that is what the best heroes can do. They can not only, protect, and they can not only embody the best of us, but they can inspire the rest of us to live up to their example. And that is what this movie's version of Cinderella does for me. Like, I'm a 35-year-old cisgender heterosexual white man. I look up to Cinderella in this movie. I want to be like her.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I think, like, there's so many elements, some of which we've touched on already, that make this such a beautiful film. But at the end of the day, I really do lay it all down to just Lily James. She just what she embodies with Cinderella, and the way she brings the character to life. It's, you've mentioned this before, and maybe it's just because this was not one of the Disney animated films growing up that I watched the most. So I didn't have a particular attachment to it like I did with movies like, Beauty and the Beast and, The Lion King, or even going back to the older ones, even something like Snow White, which I saw many times as a kid. Cinderella was the one that kind of went under the radar for me. And so for that reason, I don't think that this movie necessarily had the burden of competing with something in my mind, but I can say that, I'll just come out and say this is my favorite, version of the story, and for me that's what makes it sort of one of, not just one of, really the standout amongst the live action retellings, because I think so many of the other films had the burden of, at least for me, I'm not going to speak for other people, but sort of following in the footsteps of these, gigantic revered films. Like I actually have a pretty good opinion of the remake of Beauty and the Beast, but it's never going to conquer the original for me because that is such a classic. And but it was like a sort of a Broadway revival where, it's never going to beat the original cast, but but it's still nice to go and see it again. And so, but I was in a different situation with this movie where it's because I was not overly familiar with the original. I have seen it a number of times throughout my life, and I actually own the 4K Blu-ray of that recently came out a couple of years ago. But it was never one of the more revered Disney films for me. And so I was able to go into this one with really an open heart and do in large part because of you, Jared, because you sang its praises. And yeah, it's like this movie is just so beautiful and heartwarming from its opening minutes. But then as soon as Lily James, appears in the film, it's, she just captures a certain magic with her performance. And so again, I'll say a large part of this, what makes this movie so great is down to, her version of the character and what she brings to it. So, it's just, you can't help but love the character of Cinderella in this film. And, but I could also say that about, it's, any story about Cinderella, you've got to, you better have a compelling prince, which not all older Disney animated films, but that's one area where a modern retelling can step it up, and to have Richard Madden as Mr. Kit, is just great, and he's fantastic. And this is one of those things that I'm really glad came his way during the Game of Thrones, craze. Just because, and maybe it was just because, he was one of the, hot young actors at the time because of the show. But now he's in a Disney movie, for all time. So yeah, I'm the two of them together are, you would talk about on-screen chemistry, they just are utterly fantastic together.
Yeah, no, I mean, I will always credit Richard Madden as being one of the reasons I chose to watch this movie, because I think I had mentioned that around the time that this came out, we were in the middle of Game of Thrones' run, and it was one of the areas where I was like, any project that has a Game of Thrones actor that I like is going to get a look from me. And this movie has two, because in addition to Richard Madden, it also has Zorro's own duck sauce himself, Nonso and Anozie. But in particular,
I will never stop laughing my ass off that became a thing. Duck sauce.
Yeah, I pronounced it very specifically that way for our friends. Yeah. But in particular, I would just say that this is a movie that, as you mentioned, it falls into the genre of Disney's live action remakes of their classic animated stories. And I know that people tend to have some complicated feelings about the nature of those projects. And I have seen a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. I think they've made like 25 of them so far. And I would generally agree that for most of them, the animated movie remains the superior version of the movie. That's not to say like some of them, the more modern ones, don't have great elements. I happen to really like the 2017 Beauty and the Beast that you mentioned, starring Emma Watson. The 2019 version of Aladdin, again, I like the animated movie better. I think the two leads of that movie, Mina Massoud and Naomi Scott, give great performances, legitimately great performances. The 2023 Little Mermaid, Halle Bailey I thought did a wonderful job. And many others besides, but the reason that I will always, the thing about this movie is, and why I feel the need to, evangelize it at times, is because I have a feeling that people have a tendency to sweep all Disney live action, remakes under the same banner. And for me, this movie kind of stands apart. For me, that like it was one of the earlier ones that they made, and at least in their like current run, that kind of started with the 2010 Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland. They'd done a few before that, like the Glenn Close 101 Dalmatians, but that really kind of kicked off their big craze of remaking a bunch of them. And Cinderella was the one that for me was such the proof of concept that I was like, this can work. You can take a classic animated movie like this and retell it for a modern audience, and you can do something that some people might believe to be impossible. You can make it better. For anyone who loves the original 1950s, trust me, I'm not here to denigrate it. I think it's a classic for a reason. But I did go back and rewatch it, before this stream. I hadn't seen it in a couple of years. And there are just some elements that I noted, are very much of its time. And
which is inescapable.
Which is inescapable. But I'm also even thinking about the fact that, for one, when I went back and watched it, I realized just like Cinderella is actually not as big of a character in her own movie. And that movie is some of a lot of that movie involves a lot of, the mice and their hijinks and getting away from Lucifer, which again is great, but it's, not the kind of thing that's necessarily going to translate to a live action adaptation. And there's the dynamic I'd forgotten there's a dynamic between the king and the duke, where the king is like screaming at the duke constantly, and at one point tries to kill him with a sword. And I'm like, oh, I'd forgotten that was in the movie. And then obviously the prince, is very much a minor character, even though he is, the love of Cinderella's life. And it's
because of course, in all the old Disney movies, all a prince had to be was a prince, because why wouldn't any woman just fall into his arms?
Yeah. Exactly. And again, this is where this movie had to make those changes if it was going to be effective for a modern audience. And I think one of the reasons that I was more open to it for this is, you mentioned a lot of like the live action, the Disney Renaissance movies. Those movies are, they came out in the 90s, most of them. They are still a little bit closer to what we would consider the modern day. Cinderella's a little bit older, and also I will note, for me, there are a lot of those movies where like the Disney version is considered like the definitive version, but Cinderella has been told so many times that, the Disney version may be the most well-known version, but it is not perhaps the most definitive version. And I will note that one of my very first exposures to a live action version of a classic fairy tale that is perhaps one of the reasons I was more open to a telling of Cinderella is even when I was a kid, the night before this movie came out, the animated version was not my favorite version of the Cinderella tale. It was the 1997 Rodgers and Hammerstein version of Cinderella, a television movie starring Brandy Norwood as Cinderella, a black Cinderella, I will note it, very ahead of its time, who I was hopelessly in love with, and starring the incomparable Whitney Houston as the fairy godmother.
I've never seen it, but I definitely know of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. And the thing is, it is based on the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical version of Cinderella, not the Disney animated classic. It has different songs. It has, some slightly different, character elements and dynamics, but it is still Cinderella. Because as one of the things that Kenneth Branagh has kind of again touched on in the behind the scenes commentaries, he has a quote where he says, quote, "Everyone knows Cinderella, all cultures, all ages, because it connects with human beings at a profound level. We identify with Cinderella. Her story lets us know that life can be all right. Life can even be wonderful." And this movie takes that idea and it just runs with it and makes it, takes it into the modern day in the sense that certain elements that we would consider to be more progressive and perhaps, common sense, like the idea, like, shouldn't Cinderella and the prince kind of know each other before they fall in love with the ball? Like, yes, indeed. And shouldn't we know, for instance, why the titular iconic archetype of the wicked stepmother, why is she wicked? Well, this movie gives us at least an answer about some of her, like why she is the way that she is, and perhaps humanizes her in that way. And in particular, also, the most fundamental question of all, who is Cinderella? Who is this woman who has kind of captured the popular, imagination for centuries? And this movie takes us back, does something that the original animated movie does not do, beyond like a brief flashback scene. It takes us back. It takes us into her childhood, and it shows us her deep connection with her loving father, and more importantly, and we will talk about her in detail, with her mother. Because played by the wonderful, incomparable Hayley Atwell.
Yeah, leave it to Hayley Atwell to barely be in this film, but cast such a large shadow over the entire film. Yeah, it's like, spoiler alert. I'm not going to speak for you, Jared, but I think I probably can. We're all in love with Hayley Atwell.
Oh yes, how could you not be?
Yeah.
And I was in love with her from before I saw her in this movie, from her role, in, among other things, Captain America: The First Avenger, and the Agent Carter dynamic.
But
also, she's been in a lot of stuff, and she's a beautiful lady.
I was going to say my introduction to her, at least I think it was. When did it came out? In 2008. When did Captain America?
The first one came out in 2011.
Okay, so yeah, the first time I saw her was in The Duchess in 2008 with Keira Knightley. So, yeah.
I saw that one.
But of course, man, even though I certainly noticed her in that, my attentions were elsewhere at the time. So, but even I have to admit, like, it was Captain America: The First Avenger. She had, like, it's the reason why, like, I don't necessarily think it's the best made of the Captain America. I think pretty much everyone has to acknowledge the strengths of the Winter Soldier. Mm-hmm. But even when it came out, I had such affection for that first one, just because, the sort of, when you think Captain America, you always think of the story of how he came about and the fact that it's set in the past. And so I always had a lot of affection for that first one, but also just freaking Hayley Atwell, who was just so amazing in that, and just added so much that you're like, oh crap, is she not going to be in the next one? And she was, but a little bit. That we were blessed with 2 seasons of her own show. But all of that is to say that even a little bit of Hayley Atwell in any movie is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and I will note that, like, as you mentioned, she is only in the opening scene of this movie, and she's really only in the first 6 or 7 minutes. But you said she casts a big shadow over the rest of the movie, and I would agree with that. Only I would use a slightly different terminology. She casts her light over the rest of this movie, because from the moment we meet her, we as we would expect from the woman who was Cinderella's mother, true mother, not her wicked stepmother, she is radiant, and she embodies those virtues of kindness and empathy and, grace that Cinderella herself will, put into practice for the rest of her life.
Which I will also say, I have to say, and yeah, part of it is they made her hair blonde for this, but I really do think it was such excellent casting, because both Hayley Atwell and Lily James have this very, I want to say unique, but it's shared by both of them, this sort of sparkle in their eyes, and that just, like, you watch this and you're like, yeah, I totally buy that they're mother and daughter. And it's so I thought it was fantastic casting on, because they're both amazing, but also I think they really play the even though they don't get to share a scene together. It's unquestionable when I looked at these characters. I'm like, oh yeah, that's Cinderella's mother.
And I mean, obviously, it's a credit both to the way that Lily James portrays her Cinderella in the rest of the movie, also to the bond that Hayley Atwell's shares with the 10-year-old version of Ella, played by Eloise Webb, who also, very much looks like she could grow up to be Lily James. Yeah. But it is, we're talking around the fact she's only in the first 6 or 7 minutes of the movie, and part of the reason for that is because, as the movie says, sorrow can come to any kingdom, and soon it came to Ella's in this tragedy, because we always knew from the original version of Cinderella that, one of the reasons she has a stepmother at all is because her mother is not, around. And even, and her father, played by, I think, Ben Chaplin, does a wonderful performance as well. But, the bond that he and the White that this little family unit shares in the beginning, you just want it to last forever, and it can't. But the way that the movie goes about that, I just found so beautiful and so effective, because it shows us their happiness, and then it shows us that, yes, Cinderella's mother is dying. And when they bring little Ella in to see her for the last time, we get the scene that is really the central thesis of the movie, which is the Cinderella's mother, knowing that she is dying, has made the decision to tell her daughter what she terms a great secret. And a great secret that will see you through all the trials that life can offer. You must always remember this: have courage and be kind. You have more kindness in your little finger than most people possess in their whole body, and it has power more than you know, and magic. And just the power of those words and the way that Hayley Atwell delivers them, you believe it. It is as if a spell is being cast right then and there. And it just, because ultimately, Cinderella's mother makes Cinderella promise, asks her to live up to these words: have courage and be kind. And little Ella does. And when, and you can just see the relief on her face when she says good, good. And then the weight of what is transpiring fully dawns on her. We see the tears in Ella's father's eyes. And then she turns to her daughter and she says, I must go very soon, my darling. Can you forgive me? And this is Cinderella's first great act of kindness to her mother, knowing that she is about to lose her. Of course, I forgive you. And then when they
can I just say that this, for obvious reasons, this moment just destroyed me. I was just I was ready for the movie to cheer me up a little with happy things, because and it's a beautiful scene, but yeah, just you're in the middle of this emotional moment, and then then I realize part of what's driving such an intense emotional reaction is, oh yes, this is a mother of a child saying goodbye to their mother. And so yeah, it hit me pretty hard.
For understandable reasons. And yeah. But even for someone like me, who is very fortunate that I still have both my parents, the power of this scene and the empathy I felt for young Cinderella and for her father and for her mother at the shattering of this family unit. Again, we were the first time I watched this movie, we were 6 minutes in, and I was already in tears. Yeah. That is something that the previous versions of Cinderella had not done, great as they were. And I was just like, what is this movie doing to me? Good God.
Well, you want to, even if I hadn't experienced what I have, it's I think, and maybe it depends on your relationship with your parents, but I do think that everybody has this intrinsic, especially when you're young, this terrible fear of losing yes, either one of your parents, but especially your mother. There's a bond there that it's, I know for me, it was always my worst fear. And so this goes all the way back to being a kid and watching The Land Before Time in theaters with my mom sitting right beside me, but it shattered me. And I was just, crying. I mean, maybe not, maybe not wailing in the actual theater, but it made me really sad. And so, yeah, I think no matter your situation, that's it's something you don't want to face, and so it just immediately endears you to Cinderella, and makes you feel for the loss that both she and her father are experiencing, which then, going into the next scenes after that, just enhances, your love of their bond. Because he's a really good dad. He's shown to, over the next several years of just, being there for his daughter, and to the point where he feels like, hesitation, even guilt about approaching her about the possibility of, of marrying again. So yeah, it's, so that's the, like, I think that is one of the really great things in this movie, is just showing that Ella had two really amazing parents, and they were unfortunately ripped away from her very cruelly at different points in her life, and she gets left with the worst people imaginable.
And honestly, like her connection to her parents, as we learn later in the movie, when she reunites with one of the former servants who had been dismissed from their household, and she's asking, like, why do you stay there? And she's talking about the fact that, like, my parents, my family, like, lived in that house for over 200 years. And as her father says before he goes off on his his last trip, he says, your mother is here too, though you see her not. She's the very heart of this place. And Cinderella, says that now they're not here to, love it. She loves it for them. And perhaps is that the best reason to stay in the terrible situation that, she finds herself in? Perhaps not, one could argue. But it comes from a very sincere place, because, the love that Ella has for her parents and the memories that they shared, are one of the most precious things in the world to her. And she is, she's understandably does not want to give that up. She, this is her fighting in many ways. And
especially not to leave it to people who are not who do not appreciate it, and yeah, I think she's very hesitant to do that.
No, one could wish perhaps for better inheritance laws in this fictional kingdom of theirs, but it seems that obviously this is the nature of the story, and that bond, that love, bringing in the stepmother, Lady Tremaine, as played by the wonderful Cate Blanchett. One of the early insights that we get into, one of the big changes.
Which, by the way, can I just take a minute? I don't want to make too big of a thing out of this, because by all means, like, actors grow older and they change, and that's perfectly fine. But I seriously think that Cate Blanchett is immortal. I'm just going to say that.
Why would you think that? Is there a certain character she may have played that might give you that impression?
Yeah, I think she just might actually be Galadriel. Yeah, I was thinking this when I saw her at the War of the Rohirrim premiere. I'm like, what the hell? Like, I even made a post on social media, and where it was like, all the other actors walking the red carpet from Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit going, yeah, it's been 20 years. I still look pretty good. And then Cate Blanchett walks in and says, I'm immortal, bitches. So yeah, no, I sorry, I just have to joke about that because really she has not changed.
She
Like
she
at
she
all.
she has not, and honestly, and you want to speak of actors who had a great, individual film year. Cate Blanchett in 2015. The fact that she has this movie and she has Carol later in the year, it's
Yeah,
like, damn, woman,
yeah.
damn.
Which,
Um,
by the way, yeah, I was thinking about this before we started. The fact that obviously I knew it came out in 2015. We're doing a 10th anniversary stream about the movie, but then I was like, God damn, this is just another movie in a pardon my language fucking amazing year that was 2015.
yes.
Like that was such an outrageously great year for movies.
Yeah, and as we ran through like our personal lists for our favorite movies of certain years after our stream last week, this movie's in my top 5 for that year for a reason. But in particular, focusing on her performance as Lady Tremaine in this movie, again, she is the wicked stepmother. Perhaps the quintessential wicked stepmother, other than the Queen and the Snow White tale. And she, in the original movies, like we get a sense that like she's a very cruel and petty woman, but we don't really know why, or at least the movie doesn't really delve into it. It says that her true nature was revealed after her husband, Ella's father, died. In this movie, there's a very pivotal scene early on where, as Ella's father is preparing to go on his trip, and Cinderella is understandably crushed because she doesn't want him to go. She doesn't want to be stuck in the house with her stepmother and her stepsisters who are gambling away, the family fortune. They have that scene where he tells her that I want you to be good to your stepmother and sisters, even if they can be trying, and we need to cherish this place for her mother. And we see that Cate Blanchett's Lady Tremaine is listening to this, and Ella just asked her father, because he was seeking a second happiness when he married Lady Tremaine, but it seems he is perhaps reckoning that it's not everything that he hoped. And she asked about her mother. I miss her. Don't you? And he just has that line. He just says very much. And we see the camera fixate on Lady Tremaine as he says this, and it's that moment that she realizes that even as elegant and classy and sophisticated as she sees herself, she does not compete in her husband's heart with the ghost of this woman, his former wife. And that is, in many respects, I think, what turns her heart towards Cinderella. It's that she, I think she was always like dismissive of her before, but this is the moment where she truly starts to feel enmity and jealousy of her. And it's, because she knows, and many, like as she says, at a later scene in the movie, it's like Ellen asks, "Why do you do this?" It's Lady Tremaine says, "Why? Because you are young and good, and and she can't even finish the sentence, and so it's but. Again, this is one of the things I think that the movie had to do. That if it was going to give us, a movie's only as good
and
as
to
its
be clear, like
yeah.
that's still absolutely horrible of her. It doesn't excuse her behavior in the slightest, but it's a really great way of explaining why a character acts the way they do, but not excusing it.
Exactly.
Yeah, because that's horrible of her, but it is a peek into sort of what's behind all of it. So yeah, it's why I always like to say, and when it comes to like characters and character development, it doesn't mean you don't have to sympathize with a horrible person in something, but to get a peek behind the curtain and to understand what drives them makes them an interesting character.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's the very famous and perhaps, overused, but still relevant adage that every good villain is the hero of their own story. And we actually see that play out later in this movie when Lady Tremaine finds Cinderella's slipper. And how does she frame it? She's like, let me tell you a tale. Let me tell you a story about a young, beautiful girl who married for love. But one day, the light of her life, her husband was taken from her. And the next time she married for the sake of her daughters. And every day she was forced to look upon her husband's beautiful, good, sweet daughter, and essentially know that, she had that she was not measuring up. And she's like, and so I lived unhappily ever after. And you get the sense that like this, obviously, as you said, her actions are not excusable, but it is from her perspective, that what she is doing is to protect what she sees as hers and her family and her two beautiful, I use the term because she does, stupid daughters. Who, if she doesn't measure up to Cinderella, her Anastasia and Drizella have no chance, I'm afraid.
I love it. I don't remember which one she says it to, but when she's playing the piano and singing it, and then once Cinderella leaves the room, she just goes, "Shut up."
Do shut up. Yes, it's one of the best jokes in the movie.
Oh God. Yeah. You do have to, like, that is the one area where I will say, okay, I feel sorry for her, the fact that those are her daughters.
Yeah, it's one of those, and again, I won't necessarily speak for her, but it's one of those situations where she clearly loves her daughters, but I don't think she likes them very much. They're kind of hard to like.
It's but then you wonder, like, but how much of that is her own doing of how they were brought up. So we'll never quite know, but I will say that it's you haven't watched the show, but it does kind of remind me of what are the of in the show Bridgerton, the Featheringtons, just because they have the mother played by Polly Walker, and then her daughters, who she does not seem to like very much, and all the daughters except for Penelope, who of course is the one that they undervalue, are just sort of, I'll just say it, they're dim-witted, I mean, all apologies, but but it's the same kind of dynamic.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, so it's definite shades of that, but yeah, it's like she's trying so hard to, make things prosperous for the family, but it's just she knows what she has to work with, though.
And I mean, to like in her very modest defense, it seems like she talks about when her husband Ella's father dies. It seems like she inherits a lot of their debts, but then it also seems like she's running up some of those debts with her lifestyle and her daughter's lifestyle, because they're very shall we say materialistic, just a tad. And it is notable that like the daughters, the stepdaughters, Anastasia and Drizella, played with great aplomb, I should note, by Holiday Granger and Sophie McShera, who I'd known from before this, again, from The Borgias and Downton Abbey, respectively. Sophie McShera, being Lily Jane's castmate on Downton Abbey, I shall note. They are probably the movie's broadest characters. they get to play most of the just over the top, slapstick kind of farcical comedy. They are probably the closest things to, if one wanted to use the term cartoonish, you could for those characters. I do still think that they do a good job, humanizing them. But part of the reason it works for me is they are just so unrepentantly, like over the top in their like ridiculousness and their like headiness and their kind of small-mindedness, like the fact
you're fine, Mother Ryan. Glad to have you here.
Glad to have you. Like, for instance, there's that wonderful little bit when Ella, brings the news about the ball to them, and she, Lady Tremaine is saying that like they're going to run up 3 ball gowns, but the one's going to be for her, not for Ella. And then she speaks in French, and the daughter's like, she didn't even know what that means. And then Ella rattles off like a statement in perfect French, and Lady Tremaine's just like, and then the ostensibly very clever Drizella, Anastasia asked her, like, what did she say? And she's like, I speak French, not Italian. You're just like, oh, you're hopeless. You're so hopeless.
Yeah. I will say that when the first time I watched this movie rather shallowly, I might say, I'm not sure if I had seen Holiday Dranger and anything else before this, but I remember I made the observation. I'm like, okay, so she's kind of terrible, but Holiday Dranger. Whew.
Yes, I agree with that statement.
This time I was able to focus more on the character, and I'm like, yeah, she is really awful. but yeah. No, I did like also Helena Bonham Carter's narration for that scene, where it's something to the effect of, they were moderately interested in the news or something like that, and then it shows them getting up and being all super excited, which by the way, and we are going to get to her later, but Helena Bonham Carter does such a great job with the narration throughout this movie. It's, I feel like narration is always underrated. You notice when it's bad narration.
Yeah, she has a wonderful deadpan wit about her, where like, again, classic good writing, as well as performance, where like she will say something like very ostensibly complimentary, and then it will show the characters not living up to that. So yes.
Oh my God, that would have been so amazing. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Thanks for stopping.
To see you. Yeah. But yeah, no. So yeah, I do think that it is important though for the daughters to play to the levity of of the movie, because is very much a danger of that part of the story of Ella's relationship with her stepmother and her stepsisters being very depressing, because it's a horrible situation that she's in. So you do have to like insert some absurdity into the whole thing. And that's what the two of them are playing up. Because otherwise it's just horrible and depressing.
It would be too bleak, and like so the movie leans into it by like giving them very brightly colored, one might even say garish costumes, and having them act, very over the top. And also, in addition to their treatment of Cinderella, they don't treat each other very well either. Like their constant rivalry is actually genuinely entertaining to watch. Like that sequence before the ball where they're talking about like, oh, I wouldn't dream of pushing you out of the carriage on the way arrive, or I wouldn't, neither I nor I of stabbing your eyes out while you sleep. We are sisters.
I know, it was that one. it was the stabbing one. I was like, okay, wow.
Yeah. No, you get the sense that like they both like they despise each other, but they also kind of need each other, in that way. Yeah. Like they are a unit. And but in particular, that scene, like where they're fighting over the tiara, and then they break it in half, and immediately like start to squabble, and then we see Ella kind of just standing in the background, and again, Helena Bonham Carter's like narration where she says like, not for the first time, Ella actually felt pity for these two schemers, and it's like even though they're treating her horribly, she is kind of just like, she kind of knows that like this is just they're a mess.
Yeah. Just wanted to digress for a second and say I cannot wait to see you, Laura. It's going to be so much fun. A few of us are getting together, for the first time in a while, because we didn't have a convention last year, and boy, did I feel it. So I'm really happy to have a reunion with at least some of our friends in next month. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Wish you could be there, Jared, but you got a lot going on.
I wish I could too. Unfortunately, by the time it was in motion, I had already made other plans for vacation earlier in the month, and I realized I wasn't going to be able to take the time to make it to Chicago. But I hope you all have the wonderful time there, because I had a blast when we all did the reunion in Dallas, and I hope to join you at the next one.
Yeah, and then of course Universal decided to pick the worst month ever to re-release Pride and Prejudice into theaters.
Yeah,
so we're gonna have to do that separately, and in our own time, versus what I had hoped, which was that if it was going to be later in the year, like it should be, I was going to move heaven and earth to get us in the same place. So we could go see it in the theater together, but I guess it just wasn't meant to be.
Yeah, we'll if we can have a separate aside about why they're putting the 20th anniversary release of Pride and Prejudice that we were so hoping for and are still very excited for in April and not November. Or at least in the fall. Like make it September or October, for God's sake.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, one of these days when we get together, we'll just pop it in the Blu-ray player and have our own screening. But that's okay. And thankfully, it is coming out like before I leave for for Chicago, because of course that would have been its own kind of fun, talking people into being dragged along with me to go see it. I don't think all of them would have been happy about that. But no, it'll be, it won't be a streaming with both a screening with both of us together, but I'll still enjoy my screening of one, in theaters. It's going to be. I just can't believe it's been, well, it hasn't quite been 20 years, as we just mentioned, but but close enough. It's that'll be interesting.
We will be doing our 20th anniversary celebration of Pride and Prejudice on this channel on its actual 20th anniversary, and that will be its own separate event. But we will love going to see the movie in theaters because we love the movie.
Yeah. Oh God, it's gonna be so much. But I am, you know what? But I will say, like, regardless of when it is, I am glad that they're doing like an actual official anniversary return to theaters. I think that just goes to show that the movie has become such a classic.
Yeah.
And so yeah. But anyway, I digress. Oh wow, cool. Yeah, and I'll mention that to everybody else. Sadly, we're only going to be there for a couple days. I wish it was a longer trip. But yeah, I'll definitely mention that and see what we can swing. I'm like, don't you guys want to extend that a couple more days? And but everybody was like, no, this is what the days we agreed on. I'm like, oh, okay. And yeah, I am trying to talk all of them into going to see the anniversary screening of Revenge of the Sith, though.
That would be another one that would be fun to all go to together. But yeah, that is all another that I will be going back to the theaters for back-to-back weeks to see instant classic movies that came out in 2005 in Pride and Prejudice and Revenge of the Sith, both of which are in my top 10 of all time. So good times.
Yeah. So yeah, okay. Jumping back in, horrible stepsisters and horrible stepmother. Yeah, I will just again say again, like, though as despicable as they are, just great performances. I mean, we've talked about Cate Blanchett, but it just has to be said that as usual, she just does an amazing job. Like, as like despicable as she is, we talked about the screenplay actually giving the character room for us to understand at least where she's coming from. But as is usually the case, a lot of credit has to go to Cate Blanchett just for just finding that sweet spot of like, yes, this is a truly evil stepmother, and yet you believe that she's been through when she does talk about her story, and that, and you can tell that the things that she's gone through, because she did not have, whether or not she'd have been willing to listen, that's another argument, but she did not have perhaps a mother telling her to have courage and be kind. And so yeah, and so I think that she's definitely a sort of cautionary tale in this story. And but yeah, Cate Blanchett is just always does such a great, wonderful job with characters. The fact that you mentioned that she did both this and Carol, and to see those two characters, and you could not have like two different characters, two more different characters, and she's brilliant in both parts.
They both share an impeccable sense of style. So
this is true. Yeah, so and yeah, I just want to get into like talking about Ella and Kit, and when they meet up, and and just obviously Ella has just had it by this one, not quite, but she's very frustrated, and so she runs off on horseback and runs into who obviously as moviegoers we know is the prince, but he's not letting that on at this point because he notices that she doesn't quite realize who he is, so he'd like to keep that going so that she doesn't treat him any different. And yeah, it's just a wonderful scene. I really love it. I love obviously, and this goes to her connection with animals and stuff, and the fact that she saves the stag, and and she just deliver that wonderful line that's gets repeated just because something is done doesn't mean it should be done, or something to that effect. I just pulled the same thing that the prince pulls later on when he repeats it, and he's like, or something to that effect.
Yeah. And to be fair, he it's his first time hearing the line. Maybe if you'd watched the movie or that exchange a couple hundred times, it would roll off the tongue. But yeah, this is this is obviously one of the big things that the movie changes from the original animated classic. Oh yeah, no, we adore the movie Carol, Mother Ryan, and you've read the original book is fantastic.
Yeah, which by the way, I have done a stream on this channel. It was one of my earliest streams that that I did with one of our dear friends, and yeah, it was one of those early streams where I don't think I was even like at the point yet where I was putting up pictures from the movie. It was very early days, but it's a wonderful stream. And if you want to see me just with complete heart aflutter you know, just getting very waxing poetic about romance and and all that, and really holding in my breath as I talk about the scenes, you know, between her and Rooney Mara. That's a really good one. But as Jared and I both love that movie so much, we will undoubtedly be revisiting that at some point in the future.
I'm very happy, and this time you can put pictures up because God, that is one of the most gorgeous looking movies I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But so is this one, honestly, in many respects. And the big thing about so to get to the Kit and Ella like scene, you know, as mentioned, this is a change from the original, you know, 1950s animated movie where the prince and Cinderella don't meet before the ball, and it is what you would consider in the classic parlance of today a meet cute, perhaps, but it's one of the best in that cinematic form of that type of scene that I've ever seen. And part of it is just, you know, where we start with the characters, you know, it's notable that right before this moment is the moment when Ella actually gets the Cinderella moniker. You know, that is when the stepsisters bequeath that on her, and we see that she is like, it's devastating to her because as Helena Bonham Carter's fairy godmother says in the narration, names had power, and it seems that her stepsisters had indeed transformed her into a creature of ash and toil. And then we see,
yeah, and this is also the point where any like remaining semblance of her, like of this being her home, is ripped away from her when her stepmother, you know, is like, you're not going to eat with us. I think that's the last sort of illusion, you know, ripped away. And so, yeah, the combination of that with the name, and yeah, it's one of the most, like, it's one of the most difficult moments, I think, for her, and the fact that is, you know, what causes her to run out and has this chance meeting is the thing that we love about, you know, these kinds of stories, that, you know, that at those moments when you're, you know, when you can be at your lowest, that's when these kind of chance meetings can occur.
No, and I mean, this is a moment where, as I mentioned, as to leading up into the meeting, you know, the music is rising, this gorgeous track from Patrick Doyle called The Stag. And we see Ella racing through the woods. She encounters the stag, and then she tells it to flee when she hears the hunting horns. And then Helena Bonham Carter's voice comes in and said, perhaps it was a good thing that Ella's sisters were so cruel, for had she not run to the forest that day, she might never have met the prince. And that is when we see Richard Madden riding into the frame on all of his glory, and right into Cinderella's life. And in particular, like, from the moment that they are on screen together, there is just electricity. Even though, like, it starts off a little bit fraught because Cinderella, you know, is like, the first thing she says to him is not, thank you for slowing down my horse and potentially saving my life. It's like, why are you chasing that stag about? What did he ever do to you? And he's like, come again? But then she shows him the first hint of the empathy and the spirit that will so fascinate him when she says, like, and he's like, is he a friend of yours? And she's like, no, an acquaintance. We met just now. I just looked into his eyes and I felt he had a great deal left to do with his life. That's all. And she's talking about herself there too, you know, in many respects. And then there's the key moment where the prince asks her name, and he's like, what do they miss? What do they call you? And she says, never mind what you call me. And you can immediately get frustrated with that. Like, well, why not give him your name? But then you realize the reason she does that is because they asked, what do they call you? Well, what did her stepsisters just christen her? Cinderella. She's still wrestling with that. She doesn't, like, she's trying to run away from that. And so she doesn't faithfully give him her name, but he is also running from something. He is running from his, you know, responsibilities in the palace. And when he realizes with a little bit of good-natured shock that she doesn't know who he is, that he is the prince, he's like, they call me Kit, or at least my father does when he's not when he's especially unpeeved at me, because this is his opportunity for a real human interaction, and it's the and it allows them to talk not as prince and subject, but as two people, as Kit and the mysterious girl from the forest, Ella. But when they this is the chemistry between Richard Madden and Lily James in the scene is something you cannot fake. You can write the scene, you can direct it, you can stage it as beautifully as this movie does, but it's not going to work unless you just feel that instant spark of attraction between the two characters. And oh my God, I. It's like it truly is, destiny in this moment. And in that, when he she gives him that refrain about like the fact where she's asking, you're an apprentice at the palace, and he's like, yes, of a sort. My father's teaching me his trade, which is a very clever way out of the fact that he is an apprentice monarch. And then she asked the question, they treat you well at the palace? And he's like, better than I deserve. And then he asked, how do they treat you? And she kind of closes down a bit and says, they treat me as well as they are able. And he says, I'm sorry. And she's like, it is not. And you can just see her smile, a little bit. She's like, it is not your doing. And then he kind of takes that in and then gives her a very charming smile, where it says, nor yours, I bet. And we can just see.
Can I just pause for a second and say how fucking great Richard Madden is?
Yes,
please, he has charm up the wazoo. Yes. It's actually and he's been doing stuff, but it's one of my great frustrations that he just did not immediately become one of the most popular actors ever, because that's movie star charm right there. And again, the aforementioned chemistry between the two of them, it's just, poor poor Rob Stark, as played by him, deserved so much better.
That, I think, is one of the things that I, was so happy about with this movie. And one of the things that drew my attention to it was, this movie came out in 2015. In 2013, we all went through the collective trauma of losing Rob Stark in horrifically brutal fashion at the famous Red Wedding. And
can I just I do want to digress just for a second and just talk about how sort of, before everybody got all wound up over the whole it's going past the books. Oh, this isn't how I wanted it all to play out. There was a period where we all had the books as sort of, goalposts of everything we knew the show was going to hit. And there was the joy of watching all the poor fools who had no idea about what was in the books, and we're just watching the show with all their hopes and dreams about Rob Stark avenging his father and killing Joffrey and and all this stuff, and you're like, oh, you poor sons of bitches.
or sweet summer children, as it were. Yeah. But in particular, I do remember I was like, one of the reasons I was so delighted to learn that Richard Madden would be cast in this movie as Prince Charming is I was like, oh, he gets to play, another dashing, handsome, prince, and will be king, and this time he gets to live. Fall in love.
Unless they're really veering off course with this version of Cinderella.
Yeah, which fortunately they do not, because from the moment you see these.
Can you imagine how panicked some viewers would have been if they had say the princess he's supposed to marry, say her father had been say they had cast what's his name who played Lord Frey?
Oh, David Bradley. Yeah,
David Bradley. That would have been what's going on?
No, yeah, no. It seems like, I mean, and to be fair, he didn't break the engagement himself. The Grand Duke kind of made it behind his back, but it was like,
Yeah.
it seems the Princess Helena of Zaragoza and her kin are more forgiving than the phrase on the topic of broken engagements. um, uh, Princess Helena even seems to be a bit of a fangirl for Ella herself later in the movie. But in particular, just to kind of wrap up this concluding scene, when that you can tell that these two characters, if they had just remained just alone for who knows what would have happened. They're clearly falling for each other very rapidly. But then we get the delightful intro of Nonso and Anozie's captain, who calls out, "There you are, you're high." In the end, he's like, "My name is Kit." He's like, "We better get a move on, Mister."
Which I am just going to say, and I'm not serious about this because it's a fun romantic fairy tale. It's fine, but this is the point where I think Ella should have clocked what was going on.
Yeah.
Because it's so over the top, but that's okay. I just go with it.
Yeah, they're all waiting on the poor palace apprentice, but Ella has lived kind of a sheltered life. It's understandable. But then there's that moment when, as now they're going to be parting for now, and we get and they're about to turn away, and then all of a sudden Kit turns back and he just gives like the 10,000 watt charming smile, and it's just like, "I hope to see you again, miss." And Ella returns the smile and says, "And I you." And then as they part, this is when the music really swells in, and we get the refrain from this track is called The Stag, but the primary theme that runs throughout all the movie is from the central track, Who Is She? And it's just in full blast here, and you're just like, this was destiny. This was the moment that these two characters, they belong together, and it's only a matter of time before they see each other again. So again, one of the most effective, meet cute that I've ever seen in a cinematic adaptation, and clearly it leaves an impression on them both in the story, because Kit, as we go on to learn when we're back at the palace, has had his head completely turned by this girl. And Ella, even though she does not appear quite as like completely obsessed, she is just, she's delighted by the prospect that she might get to see him again at the ball. And one of the reasons it's so devastating that they try to say she can't go.
Yeah, I want to comment on the music here, because this is essentially the main romantic theme of the movie. There's also like, I mentioned earlier the music that's derived from Lavender Blue, which is sort of like treated like it's the B theme to the A theme we get here, and it also makes its most glorious appearance in the track Who Is She? Yeah. But this is the like chief original romantic theme of the film, and yeah, it's just absolutely breathtaking. Patrick Doyle is a goddamn genius. He has always been one of my favorite composers, and really, I think my personal favorite score of his is from Kenneth Branagh's 1996 version of Hamlet, which is just a masterpiece onto itself, and the music throughout the film is brilliant. He also composed the music for Henry V, Sense and Sensibility, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire,
first Thor movie.
The first Thor movie, another Kenneth Branagh film. I'm just so absolutely like, he's more he works in a somewhat different vein than somebody like John Williams, who makes much more like music that you would expect to hear like in the concert hall. It's big, in that sort of, this is orchestral as well, but that's in a more like Williams does more in the like purely classical style, and I feel like Patrick Doyle is very much a romantic in his style of music, which is probably why I love it so much. So yeah, like every time I see Patrick Doyle's name, I'm like, hell yes, just inject it into my veins.
And I had heard his music before, obviously in other movies I'd watched, like Thor and Sense and Sensibility. And yes, Danny, the watch party that we had for this movie a couple years ago, I think at this point, is awesome. It's one of my favorites that we've done. Glad you could join us. But yeah, I will just note that this is my favorite Patrick Doyle score for this movie. I have listened to it so many times. It's I would say it's embarrassing, but I actually don't feel the slightest tint of embarrassment.
Well, and again, like I said, I'm so glad I finally ordered it along with the movie today. So I'm looking forward to getting my little Cinderella, gift box in the mail in a few days. But more and more, I tend to try, and because I do have a subscription to Apple Music, so I try to, like, if I watch something and I like the music, I try to just get my fill of it. If it's not like, something like a Star Wars soundtrack or a Lord of the Rings soundtrack or something, I try to get my fill on it, by just listening for free on the streaming app. But I have listened to this score enough times on there. I was like, you know what, screw it. I just need to buy the CD because I want to have it on my shelf as part of my collection. So
you'll have to show it off once it arrives, because it's a beautiful.
Absolutely. But yeah, of course, we're talking about here in this scene, but it's nothing compared to what we get at the ball, a couple scenes forward from now. But I do, just before we get to that, I want to talk a bit about, once we return to the castle and to Kit's home turf, and shower praise on all the actors that we meet there. First, I want to, I say get out of the way. I'm not, I don't mean that as horribly, but he's not playing a great character. I'll just mention, no, it's a good character, but he's not a great guy. I'll just mention Stellan Skarsgård as the Grand Duke. On Wikipedia, it describes him as shady and calculating, and I think that describes him perfectly. I always love me some Stellan Skarsgård, but not necessarily this this character that he's playing. But he's good, he always is.
He's really good in this movie, and it's we'll tie it into, like, again, changes from the original 1950s. He's playing a very different character of the Grand Duke than the original, because the original Grand Duke, and we'll tie this into our discussion of the King, the original Grand Duke is kind of just a poor, put upon, house servant in many ways, doing the king's bidding and not being treated very well for it. But this movie kind of flips that dynamic and makes the Grand Duke kind of the movie's secondary antagonist, with obviously Lady Tremaine being the primary antagonist, because he is, above all, it seems, a political schemer. And his motivations, one could argue, are perhaps, in the right place, in the sense of he says he's doing everything he's doing for the good of the kingdom. It is.
And to be fair, like, that's not incorrect.
No, it's not. Exactly.
Actually, he's trying to serve, his kingdom and his country. It's, and the way he sees that is by solidifying alliances, and it's actually, objectively speaking, it is the thing he should probably be doing. So it's just, though, that's this is a romance, and he's getting in the way of the romance. So we don't like him.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, it's not what he's about, it's how he's about it in many respects. But he has some great, lines and perspectives, like, when he's talking, when Kit is talking about, like, could I not say wed a good, honest country girl? And he has the line, like, how many divisions will this, good, honest country girl bring us? What security can she provide to the kingdom? We're a small kingdom and it's a dangerous world, And then, again, that is kind of what the primary advisor to the king should be thinking about, how best to protect the kingdom. And when Kit becomes king later and he's, very focused on finding Ella, and he's like, and the captain is telling him, don't lose heart. And the Grand Duke spits out, like, on the contrary, lose heart and gain wisdom. Because from his perspective, he thinks Kit is being rather foolish and, cavalier with the kingdom's safety and security. And he is trying to, make sure that he actually is marrying for advantage, as they say. But whose advantage is the question, as Kit, challenges him. Is it just for, I'm sure there is for the kingdom, but, as we learn, the Grand Duke ultimately has already gone behind the king, maybe not behind the king's back, but definitely behind the prince's back, and made an engagement promising him to the Princess Selena of Zaragoza.
Which, and to be fair, let's just say, not to get completely superficial here, but the Princess Selena is goddamn gorgeous. He's made a really good match for him.
Oh, yes.
Not to say that that's everything. It's not. But I'm just saying, like, there are worse. There are worse things to be put upon a prince.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll just note that she's played by Jana Perez, who is a Spanish actress and model. And yes, she is gorgeous. And, actually, perhaps in another story would have been a very fitting match for Kit. But in this movie, she's not Ella. So yeah, she kind of, and I also find it interesting that, even though, like, we'll talk more about their exchange at the ball, but the fact that once Ella shows up, even the Princess Selena is just like, God damn. Who is that? She's the one who has the line. Who is she?
But then another great line from Stellan Skarsgård. She's like, who is she? And he goes, I have no idea.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, yeah, like Stellan Skarsgård, much like Cate Blanchett, I don't know if the man is capable of giving a bad performance. This would not be considered one of the pinnacles of his filmography, perhaps.
And it always, well, I will say it cracks me up, and this is often the case. You don't necessarily always see the greatest actors in their finest performance or their finest hour, but it just always cracks me up that the first thing I remember noticing Stellan Skarsgård and he was in stuff way before that, obviously, but I saw him for the first time in King Arthur from 2014, and he injected a lot more life into that character than perhaps the character even deserved or required, and what many other actors would have done. So that, hence why I noticed him. I was like, wow, he's really got presence. But then it wasn't long before I noticed him every single time he was in something. I was like, this is a really great actor. And yeah, so it doesn't matter how, and you want to talk about great performances by him. I think when we were running through our lists last week after the stream about our favorite movies from each year, in one of the years you mentioned The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the American version, and his performance in that is insane.
Terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely terrifying. So yeah, no, fantastic actor. I love him, but he is out. I will say though, he's outshone by another esteemed actor, one Derek Jacobi, who plays the king. And I will say, upon this rewatch, I had even more admiration. I thought he did an excellent job on my first viewing, but I came away this time being like, shit, he did a really amazing, great job in this performance. And again, he's in the movie an okay amount of time, but doesn't by any means have a whole lot of screen time, but what he does with it is just absolutely phenomenal. The final scene between him and Kit, it just is, I mean, so powerful. And and like he has so many wonderful moments throughout. Just an earlier scene where Kit is, having that back and forth with him, where, you know, he's like, it wouldn't have stopped you, and it would have. He's like, it wouldn't. It wouldn't. Okay, you're right. and then the exchange that he has with Ella, on the balcony as she's running out, of the castle, and just like he doesn't even really utter a word in that scene, but it's just him listening to what she's saying and his reaction. And then of course the final scene between them, as I mentioned, between him and Kit, and just like, a father realizing at the end of the day he knows, what he needs to say to his son to actually be a good father, and to like toss aside all the other bullshit that enters into those types of things. And he's just like, no, let me just be straightforward with you, marry for love, not advantage. And it's just it's so beautiful. And I would have expected nothing less from Derek Jacobi, but also there's the fact that he's being directed here by Kenneth Branagh. And, if you've seen the 96 Hamlet, he is like, as much as he's the villain of that movie, there has never been a better Claudius. He gives such an amazing three-dimensional, beautiful performance in that film. And so to see him in this, it's not nearly as big of a role, obviously, but he's just absolutely astounding. And so, yeah, I'm not wearing a hat today, but I do want to tip my cap to him, because what a great performance.
Yeah, I've always loved him in this movie. I'd mentioned as much when we did our stream on Gladiator a couple of weeks back. But I think on these past particular viewings, this weekend, perhaps because I had just rewatched the original 1950 movie, I've never been more impressed with his performance, because I'll just note, he plays a completely different version of the king than the 1950s movie. The 1950s movie, the king is kind of a little bit of a ridiculous character, if I'm being honest. He is, he loves his son, but he's very frustrated that his son has not given him grandchildren. So he's the one kind of orchestrating all these machinations to set up the ball and, essentially create this plot where he can fall in love with an eligible maiden. And he's essentially berating the Grand Duke to do it, and like treating him very badly, honestly. Like I mentioned, there's an amusing sequence, but a dark sequence, where he's basically trying to kill him with a sword because he thinks he's failed. That is not the character Derek Jacobi is playing. The bond that he has with Kit is incredibly sincere, and you get the sense that there is true love between the father and the son here. Also born in many respects in mirroring Ella, of course, of grief, because Kit's mother has clearly passed on before the events of this movie, and that has left its mark. And unlike Ella's father, it's clear that the king is not remarried. So his son is essential, and his kingdom are all that he has. And as he says, he just wants to see him safe, and that is his motivation, for encouraging him and not to be alone. So he wants him to take a bride for that reason. And yes, because he's the king, he's like, well, a princess is the suitable bride, but he's not quite as strident about it, and in particular, when he gets that interaction with Ella, that, like, again, Ella transforming the hearts of everyone she comes into contact with, even briefly, like, it's clear he's like, you know what? No, you're right. Like, this girl from the forest, I thought you were kind of being silly to be infatuated with. no, like clearly she's something special, and you should go find her. And that final scene that between him and Kit as the king is dying, like it is one of the very best scenes in the movie, just because like the dialogue and the performances, where this is after the transcendent high of the ball scene, and the fact that we cut to this, which is an incredibly sad scene where the king is on his deathbed, and he's basically trying to convince the prince one last time to marry for advantage, and Kit has the line where he says, "I love and respect you, but I will not. I believe that we need not look outside of our borders for strength or guidance. What we need is right before us, and we need only have courage and be kind to see it." And then we just see Derek Jacobi's king smile and say softly, "Just so. You've become your own man. Good, and perhaps in the last little time left to me, I can become the father you deserve. You must not marry for advantage. You must marry for love." And then, and as Kit is saying, "Thank you, father," and the tears are coming, and he's like, it's the mirror of the scene with Ella and her parents in the beginning of the movie, where he's basically like, I need to go, and his father's like, and Kit is like, "Don't go," and he just has the wonderful soft smile line, be cheerful, boy." And then when Kit, like leans down and, I love you, father, I love you, son. And then Kit like leans down onto his father's, chest and just lies there and cries. And then the king puts his arm around him, like, God damn it, the movie's doing it to me again. It had me in tears with the first opening scene where Ella lost her mother. And like here we're getting essentially another version of that, and it's affecting me every bit as much. It's
just it's like we so often hear with that space franchise. It rhymes, and just having this be the echo of the scene with Ella and her mother is just so beautiful and heartbreaking. And
all credit to Derek Jacobi. I just as you said, it's not the biggest role, but like he just crushes this, and makes you feel the bond and the love between him and credit to Richard Madden as well. It's like this is one of his best scenes in the movie.
Oh God, yeah, and because I in no way, shape, or form want to rush through the ball scene, let's do the mid-roll real quick, and then we'll jump into that. First of all, I should say this is going to be a lot faster than what we did last week. I do want to apologize to anybody who I did not realize even after the fact how long that took us. I now realize that we spent almost an entire 2 hours on talking about our favorite films of 2024. That was not the way to do that. In retrospect, I wish we had finished our discussion of Amadeus and then done the discussion about our favorite movies. But really, I think the lesson we learned was just in the future, the Oscar night stream needs to be its own stream. But that's okay. Lesson learned. This is going to be real quick. Just going to talk about what we've got coming up. Next week, we're going to be talking about the 2006 film Casino Royale, the first Daniel Craig James Bond film. And I am so excited to talk about that one. Speaking of soundtracks that I hunted down on eBay a couple years ago, I did that with the Casino Royale soundtrack, because it came out in 2006, so of course it was available on CD. But yeah, no, it's I think I have come down on the fact that even though obviously Skyfall is a big, looms large in the Daniel Craig filmography, and I think that's probably a lot of people's favorite of those films. I think Casino Royale is still my favorite, just because, as well as shaking things up for the franchise and giving it sort of a fresh sort of back to basics, energy. It also, I think, has one of the best musical scores of any James Bond film, and it's still within that sort of classic sound. And it's composed by the great David Arnold. They lean more modern and electronic with the later films like Skyfall, Spectre, and No Time to Die, which is fine, but I liked that Casino Royale still had one foot in the sort of old school, realm. And so anyway, we'll get into all that next week when we talk about it. But I'm really excited because it's one of my faves. And then what are we doing after that? It's Andor after that, right? Yeah, mm-hmm. We're going to be talking about the first season of Andor. That's going to be a lot of fun because we love talking Star Wars.
Yes, we do.
And I've been getting really excited, and I've been reading the new Star Wars book that just came out, which is tied to Andor, which is, it's called Reign of the Empire, Mask of Fear, and it's about basically the first year after the fall of the Republic and the birth of the Empire, which is unfortunately extremely relevant at this moment. But it allows me to plunge my anxieties into the fictional world of Star Wars instead of the real world. So maybe that'll even factor in a little bit into our discussion. But yeah, so looking forward to that. And then I think after that is when we're taking our break, right?
Yeah, no. So I'm going to be going on vacation for 2 weeks. Starting on March 29th, and so I will be gone for the March 30th date and the April 7th date. I'll be in Europe, but then I'll be back by April 13th, and we'll just have to decide if we want to do something on that date and the 20th, because then I know you'll be gone on the weekend of the 27th. But then once we get into May, we'll be back doing things more regularly.
Yeah, in May we'll be covering Andor season 2. We'll be talking about the director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven, which is really the only the only version of the movie for me. And then on May 25th, we'll be celebrating the not a particularly notable one, but we'll be celebrating the anniversary nonetheless of the original Star Wars. Yeah, so lots of fun stuff ahead.
Yep. No, looking forward to all of it. Sorry, our schedule will be a bit irregular in April, but we'll keep you apprised, of course. And we still got a couple good weeks of March discussions left. And I'll just say about our discussion from last week is that it was a really great discussion, both halves of it, the Amadeus section and the movies of 2024 favorite movies. And because I recognized that it was a beast of a stream, I did go back and put time codes in the comments section. So if all you're interested in the Amadeus discussion, you can just watch that part. Or if you want to see us talk about all of our favorite movies of 2024, I broke that down by sections as well. And so you can hear us talk about another 14 great movies from last year.
Yeah, I will say, though, even though the exact placement of that discussion may not have been ideal, I had a blast both doing that and obviously the Amadeus discussion as well. I think we talked about a lot of really great stuff, and I'm really happy in retrospect with the list of movies that we compiled for our sort of best of the year. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. And like I said, this week's midsection noticeably shorter because we're done, and now we're going to jump back into Cinderella. So, and of course, I just unplugged my camera by accident. Oh, hold on a second.
There we go.
Yay! Cool. There we go.
It's almost like it was magic, which actually is probably the best segue, because before we get to the ball scene, we should talk about how Cinderella gets to the ball.
Did something happen there?
Oh yeah, yeah. We get a classic character played in a wonderful new form. Who we should would address. Um, which it should be noted that of course what leads into this scene is the perhaps the single greatest act of cruelty that the stepmothers and the stepsisters perpetuate on Ella, which is after they for basically say we're not going to get you a dress to go to the ball. She makes her mother's old dress with the assistance of the mice, a callback to the original animated film.
Which I do have to say, I love that, obviously the mice are not exactly what they are in the original animated film, but they are quite a bit more, well, animated than than sort of real mice. But this is a fantasy, so we're okay with it.
Yeah, and we'll maybe touch on it later, but yes, they have a significantly reduced role where they basically dominate half the movie in the original animated version. As does poor Lucifer the cat. He does not get as much shine, and but he's also perhaps not quite as evil. So,
we even get a scene where Ella is, of course, as you would expect her to be, but she's extremely nice to Lucifer and holds him, and. Yeah, and it's not his fault that his owner is awful.
Yeah. And we see no more definitive example of that, or his owner being awful, than in the scene when Ella comes down the staircase in her mother's dress, and we just see the look on Lady Tremaine's face, recognizing that this ostensibly poor servant girl that she has tried to make Ella is in a dress that's of far less material quality than the dresses her daughters are wearing, but she is just outshining them effortlessly, and it triggers perhaps the blackest expression of rage for Lady Tremaine, and the cruelest action where she and her daughters, in a direct callback to the animated film, tear Ella's mother's dress to shreds. And this is the moment that if Ella has a darkest moment in the movie, this is it, because this dress means the world to her. Her mother meant the world to her, and we feel every ounce of that pain and shock and betrayal when her response to this is just to look at her stepmother and say, "How could you?" And she could have said so much else. She could have cursed there. She could have screamed, but that was damning enough. Just she cannot believe that someone would be this evil. But Lady Tremaine commits to the bit. This is the wicked stepmother in full effect. And Ella's despair after this scene, is completely understandably earned, because as mentioned, the fact that she is so committed to having courage and being kind does not mean that it's easy. Clearly, It is not. And this is the scene where her faith comes closest to breaking, as she goes and she kneels down by the well and calls out to her mother, saying, "I'm sorry, mother. I tried. I tried to be. I wish I tried to have courage, but I don't. I don't believe anymore." And you're just your heart is shattering for her in this scene, because she has deserved none of what's happened to her, and now she's completely alone, and now she's not even going to get this small grace of going to the ball to meet who she thinks is the apprentice Kit, this one person who she had interacted with who had been kind to her, and so she is truly at her lowest. And if this were a more cynical movie, perhaps this would have been the opportunity for her to reshape her perspective into something more darker. But this is a fantasy. This is a fairy tale. And in this world, fairy godmothers exist. Of course, the reason I mentioned about the kindness is because Ella is at her lowest here. But then when, she happens to, as she's moving through the yard, she comes across the fairy godmother in disguise as an old beggar woman. And she, she basically just asks Ella for a crust of bread or a bowl of milk. And Ella's first reaction is not to do what most of us would do, which is, "Who the hell are you and why are you on our property?" Which again, this is where the fantasy comes in. She recognizes that this is a woman in need, and she just immediately puts her own concerns aside and says, "Of course." And she gives, she goes and gets her the milk, and she the fairy godmother, in disguise says, like, she asks her why she's upset, and Ella tries to say it's nothing, and she has the line, and the fairy godmother has the line like, nothing. What is a bowl of milk? Nothing. But kindness makes it everything. And this is Ella's faith being rewarded here, because she had that conversation with her mother about fairy godmothers in the opening scene, and do you still believe in them? Like, who looks after us? Fairy godmothers, of course. And we see that even though Ella has kept many of her tenets of her mother's perspective, to have courage and be kind, she has let some more childish things go, because when Helena Bonham Carter is like, I'm your fairy godmother. She's like, you can't be. They don't exist. and she's like, this is the case where showing is better than telling. So let me show you. And then we get, Helena Bonham Carter in all of her glory.
And she is such a trip in this movie. Like, you automatically know whenever Helena Bonham Carter is in a movie that she's gonna like just add a spark of energy to the proceedings, and yeah, it's just so great. Even when I was thinking about this, even when it's something, one of her more quote unquote serious roles, like something in, say, The King's Speech, she still has that really wry sense of comedy.
Yeah.
And yeah, I always love it when she's in something, and like, of course, she's the fairy godmother.
And it's a wonderful inversion, because she had just come off a string of roles where she was playing a little bit darker characters. She was in Sweeney Todd. She was Bellatrix Lestrange in the Harry Potter films. But here she gets to play the embodiment of goodness and kindness. But she still brings her little, her Helena Bonham Carter, eccentricity to it, because this is another change from the original animated movie, at least in terms of the depiction, because the original fairy godmother in the 1950s is very grandmotherly. And the Whitney Houston's version of in the 1997 Rodgers and Hammerstein that I had mentioned, she basically plays the fairy godmother as a true magical goddess, as Whitney Houston would. Helena Bonham Carter plays her a little bit more as almost the cool aunt. Who she's magical, she's powerful, but she also, is a little bit forgetful, a little bit, uncouth at times. She has that wonderful thing where she cracks her neck, which is not something that you would think a fairy godmother would do. But she is, and she just almost seems very scattershot in her thought process, where she's just we need something that says coach. Well, how about that? Yeah, trough. It's does it really say coach? Do you have any watermelons? Cantaloupe? I don't even know what that is.
I don't know what that is.
Artichokes, kumquats. We do have pumpkins. Pumpkins. I don't usually work with squashes. Too mushy. This will be a first for me. But she's game to give it a go. Yeah, she's so much fun in this sequence, and it is notable that this sequence is her only time on screen in the movie. But obviously, her presence has been felt because, as we had alluded to, she narrates the entire film, so her role feels even more expansive.
Yeah, and it is noticeable. It is notable that this is this sequence, as well as the sequence closing off, after the ball, when Ella's rushing to get back home. These are the most fantasy sequences of the movie, but it works so wonderfully, and it's got such charm. Yeah, no, I love it. I love how she, turns the different animals into the mice get turned into the horses, and and the lizards get turned into
footmen.
The footmen, which what a great line later on, and I'm just a lizard, not a footman. Enjoy it while it lasts.
He still has some lizard-like qualities to him. Still has his
Yeah.
fondness for insects. You can tell this is a little bit haphazard because when she picks Mr. Goose as the coachman and sets him up there, and he has the great deadpan line, "I can't drive. I'm a goose." That's a capable enough job, I would say. He maneuvers that carriage around some tricky corners later. But obviously, the highlight of this sequence is and one of the movie's true moments of beauty is the dress, and the way that because obviously.
And this picture is not going to do justice to how magical the sequence is when the dress is getting, transformed, or shall we say enhanced. And just, the use of the visual effects and everything, just, it's so beautiful the way not only the way the dress transforms, but also just the way that Lily James carries herself, like during the sequence, and again the music, Patrick Doyle's music, it is like magic personified on screen, and it's just completely enchanting.
Yeah, this track is called Pumpkins and Mice, and for the most part, it's light and hoppy and fun. And then when we get into the dress transformation sequence, the full main theme kicks into absolute powerful effect. And the emotions of the scene are really what make it work, because obviously, it starts off where, Ella recognizes, like, I need to fix my dress. I can't go like this. And the fairy godmother was like, no, trouble. Like, I'll just make you something new. And she's like, no, please don't. This was my mother's, and I'd like to go in it. It's almost like taking her with me. And the fairy godmother, he's like, of course she understands. She's the fairy godmother. But she's like, but you wouldn't mind if I G it up a bit? Wouldn't mind a nice blue? And Ella does not. And then that moment where the music starts to swell and as the fairy godmother casts her spell, and we see Ella, turning and just smiling with joy as her dress is transformed and goes from kind of the pink and old-fashioned dress to this radiant, almost like otherworldly blue. It's breathtaking. Like, I remember catching my breath watching this sequence. And this would be a good time to mention the one Oscar nomination that this movie got. I would have given much more, but one Oscar nomination. And if it was going to be for anybody, it was going to be for the legendary Sandy Powell, who did the costumes. Because talking about the making of this dress, it has like 10,000 little pieces of crystal woven into the fabric, so it will naturally catch the light as she turns. And you can just see the ornate, folds and ruffles of the dress and everything, and just the way Lily James wears it. It is one of the best. It is the signature costume of this movie that is rife with incredible costumes. And even though this is not my area of expertise, I just think I can't praise it enough. It's one of the best movie costumes I've ever seen.
Okay, I was ready to get enraged at whatever won that year, but it was Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah, I'm not. That.
I'm not going to get angry about that, because I was cheering for every single win that Mad Max had that year. So, and it had kind of a little tech sweep, that year, and so I'm like, yeah, okay. but this would have been a great win too. It just absolutely incredible. And and we haven't even talked about when she actually gets to the ball and the dance and all that. But yeah, it's just amazing. And then, of course, but the finishing touch, of course, is that fairy godmother made sure that, she has the shoes, the slippers to go with it. And she's like, well, then nobody's going to see. And she's like, oh, nonsense. And And she's like, they're glass. Yeah. Indeed, you'll find they're very comfy too.
Yeah. No, she did not lie. She is rather good at shoes, and that little line is a nice touch to the fact that, of course, the glass slippers are the one piece of magic that outlives the stroke of midnight. So, but yeah, it's and these shoes are, I should know, are for production reasons. They're made of crystal, not glass, because glass doesn't naturally catch the light in this way. But obviously they're beautiful, to look at, and fitting of the iconic glass slipper for Cinderella. And off she goes to the ball.
I do love that she's like, oh, remember, Ella, it's magic only lasts for so long, so you must be back by the last stroke of midnight. And I just kept thinking, I'm like, midnight, can't you make it 1 a.m.?
Yeah, maybe there's maybe they don't have daylight savings time in this fantasy kingdom. But yeah, it's like, could you at least make it to but sunrise, like that? But I guess the rules of magic are hard, that can't be broken.
Yeah, and one wonders, especially since, as you mentioned, the slippers continue to exist. Maybe it's just all plays out exactly as the fairy godmother intended, and that the midnight deadline is sort of all part of the plan. And so it works out in the end.
Indeed. Mother Royne is pointing out something very dark. Yes, if you ever go back and read the original fairy tales on which a lot of these, Disney classics are based, you will find there's some dark fuck there. And this is one of them. She basically cuts her feet to try and fit it into the glass slipper, and it still doesn't work.
Oh God. Yeah. I do find it hilarious that apparently nobody else wears the same size as Ella. I know they're fitted in a very particular way, but it's like they don't even come close to fitting anybody else, which just I found kind of funny. But again, fairy tale. So yeah, let's just talk about it when the ball. Again, the whole sequence where Kit's obviously looking for her, and there's the whole setup of the fact that he's accompanied by the princess, and all this stuff, but then Ella comes. The fact that I love that she knocks on on the door, and then it opens, and then everybody, which by the way, throughout this whole sequence, this is the track that's playing is Who Is She, by Patrick Doyle. And it is just, once she starts descending the steps, and that is when the Lavender Blue theme, comes in, full blast. And it is just like, when I talk about heart aflutter, like I just am in just complete awe and like holding my breath in at this whole sequence. It is so beautiful, as Lily James is beautiful in the scene, and the costume design, as we mentioned, just the production design, the cinematography, like everything is just like firing on all cylinders. Yeah, it's like, and as for the music, like this is the track that I've listened to like 5 billion times.
As you should. It is the movie's signature piece, and this is the movie's signature scene. And I will just make no bones about it. Like, this is one of my all-time favorite movie scenes in any film. It is just breathtakingly gorgeous and impeccably crafted from every aspect of it. If you go, there is an excellent 11-minute feature on the Blu-ray about the making of this sequence and the fact, what all it took to construct the stage. They shot this on the James Bond stage, by the way, the Alfred Broccoli stage. But it's like the crystals and the fact that there were like 2,500 candles that it took them an hour to light, and there are 500 extras, every one of whom is wearing an immaculately crafted costume, and they have a real orchestra playing the music in like live there on set. But ultimately, it's all just to set up Ella's entrance and Ella and Lily James' performance as she enters this magical world for the first time, and Richard Madden's performance when he sees her. And never has a man looked more instantly and irrevocably smitten than Richard Madden's kid for damn good reason, because the sequence just is it's almost beyond words, and like it's telling that like even as the music is playing, everyone else in the room falls silent on Ella's introduction, and the phrase that gives the track its name, "Who is she?" is on everyone's lips. Because when Ella comes down the stairs and Kit makes his way towards her and everyone parts to allow them to come together in the center of the floor, and then their first words to one another, like first the way they look at each other, and then the word, like it's so incredibly romantic. Even though the dialogue is like, it's very sparse, but it just, you feel the emotion behind every word when Ella just now recognizing that he's the prince, but addresses him as Mr. Kit. And Kit responds, "It's you, isn't it?" He knows it's her. But she smiles and says, "Just so." And he's like, "Your Highness," because clearly he's like, she must be a princess. And Ella does not correct him. But I think she's just a little overwhelmed in that moment. But I just love the fact that in this moment, Kit is like, "If I may, that is, if it would give me the greatest pleasure, if you would do me the honor of letting me lead you through this, the first." And then he can't even finish because he just finds her so. And so she's like, "Dance? Yes, dance, that's it." And they laugh and she nods. And then he places his hand on the small of her back and she gasps, like a little soft gasp. And then the waltz starts. And oh my God, this dance sequence is just, I can't even.
And I think you've made the joke before about, the fact that the ease with which they dance and the fact that there isn't a lot of tripping over the dress, it doesn't even matter. Like, and that's the beauty of like both cinema and fairy tales. It's like just falling into the beauty and the magic of what we're seeing, and reality can take a back seat. But yeah, it's just, oh God, yeah, the way they glide or across the dance floor, and the way she's doing this thing with the movement of her head, and it's like, it's just so beautiful and romantic, and just, I'm gonna say it, I swoon watching watching this.
I do too, and I almost forget to breathe, which is a problem because the sequence lasts like 3 or 4 minutes, and I have to actually consciously remind myself to breathe. As much as the characters are, because they are just they're so swept up in the love and the magic of this moment, and they almost can't believe it, which is fitting that like as they're off on their dance, Ella's like eyes go wide and she's like, "They're all looking at you." And Richard Madden, of course, has the hammer line, quite smooth for the moment, considering he couldn't talk 2 seconds earlier. Believe me, they're all looking at you. And he's correct. Obviously, like Richard Madden's a very handsome guy himself, and plenty of people I'm sure had their eyes on him, but yeah, it's Ella in this scene.
And then, oh God, and then when, they're dancing, and then he lifts her up, and, who among us can not just completely, just be absolutely in love with the whole, picking picking the girl up in the middle of the dance and gliding across the dance floor. It's just it's so beautiful and romantic, and yeah, I just say the same thing. I'm just like holding my breath in for the entire sequence.
Yeah. No, this movie makes me want to learn ballroom dancing because like it looks fun, even though it looks hard. And there's a great again from that behind the scenes feature moment where like they're talking about the dance and the complicated choreography, and then once it's over, they follow Lily James off to the side. She's like, "I'm so out of breath. Like I don't feel very fit right now." But then as she's like kind of laughing and catching breath, she's like, "I think I just fell in love with Richard," and I'm like, "I get it." I'm pretty sure he fell in love with you too, Lily. It's hard not to.
Oh God. Oh, it's just so amazing. Yeah, I don't even want to move on from this talking about this moment, because it's as you said, it is the movie's sort of signature scene, and it's just, oh God, it's so beautiful. This is like, I'm gonna say, like, this is one of those moments, like, even before I started like exploring sort of my identity and all that stuff, and where I started realizing that I identify in a lot of ways with some sort of feminine sort of qualities and emotions, and balanced out with, I love my fair share of more quote unquote manly stuff too, the action scenes and all that. But like, even before I sort of factored that into my identity and how I wanted to, feel about myself, I've always loved just being able to fully give myself over to loving romance in movies, and feeling free to just hold my breath and then just let it all out watching this, and just getting so near hyperventilating, watching these beautiful romantic scenes. I mentioned the stream that I did about Carol, and I did that with I want to make sure that I say their name right, because of course they went by a different name at the time when we did the stream, but I did it with our friend Rowan, and they love the movie, perhaps even more than I do, and I love the movie quite a bit. But we got to talking about the love scene in the film, and I was just like breathing so heavy just talking about it, because it just made my heart flutter, and all that. And it's the same thing here, just with this dance scene. It's so beautiful. And anyway, my point being, like, I can't fathom sort of living without being able to get caught up in these types of things, and not expressing just my complete adoration for moments in cinema and other storytelling like this. It's just, I'm like, I don't know how how some people just sort of bottle this stuff up and don't like completely allow themselves to, again, I'll use the word swoon, like, just I mean, how do you watch something like this and feel nothing? I really don't know. It seems near impossible to me.
I don't know either. And I mean, and this, even though I've not been on the same journey with my identity as you have, Gwen, like, this is one of those movies where I was like recognizing that, like, I was having a sincere emotional reaction and loving it as much as I was, and like learning not to be afraid to say that, yes, I adore this movie. One of my all-time favorite movies is this version of Cinderella, and I don't care if somebody thinks that's not what I should think, because it just.
And I think you and I also share, feeling that way for, obviously, for Pride and Prejudice.
Right, Prejudice, which was
That's a
probably
major.
the original, yeah.
touchstone for both of us, and really was the it's relevant to talk about because I think it's in the same vein of what I feel when I'm watching this movie. But it's like with that movie, I don't think it was the first time that I felt those emotions, but it was the first time that I was conscious of it and gave myself license to not sort of do the stereotypical thing, for someone who presents as male, and I was, very much, just identifying, at the time as, a cisgender male, just I gave myself license to be like, well, just screw what the picture of myself that I'm supposed to have. I'm just going to sort of squeal with delight at the romance that's unfolding before me. And yes, I'm hoping against hope that Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy get together at the end, and I'm just going to just give myself over to that. And I always talked about how that was such a big, like, sort of life-changing thing for me in the way that I approached the types of stories that I take in, and not just what stories I would take in, but the manner in which I would receive them. And I think I was very much feeling that even beforehand. I would feel it even if I wasn't acknowledging it openly when I watched stuff like musicals like Moulin Rouge or Phantom of the Opera, and stuff like that, or even Disney movies. In retrospect, my love of Beauty and the Beast, tapped into all that stuff, and so yeah, it's just carried me along on this journey to now when I watch something like this, and you get a moment like this, I'm just like, oh my God, it's so amazing, and I wish I could feel that 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 type of thing for myself. And so yeah, I am a hopeless romantic, and yeah, it just comes out in full force with stuff like this. It's God bless you to everybody involved in this, but especially I do lay a large part of the blame on Patrick Doyle, because his music just completely obliterates me.
And this, like, clearly Patrick Doyle was romantic himself to compose something like this, as is Kenneth Branagh to direct it, as is, it's it takes to the waltz, and it is telling that, like, Richard Madden is in this scene, and he is, very much head over heels with Lily James Ella in this scene, and like, does that make him less of a man that he's dancing with this beautiful woman? It's like, no, it does not. In many respects, he is the epitome of like idealized masculinity in this way. We had talked, I think, on our Gladiator stream about like exemplars of masculinity, and we cited Maximus and Aragorn. Honestly, like, this version of the Prince is another one, because he goes from like basically a construct in the original to a fully fleshed out character who is very empathetic and loves his family and loves this woman and loves his people, and will, and learns to grow and change and to follow Ella's example of how to have courage and be kind and follow his heart. And obviously Ella, is on that journey as well, and so it's like, these are human emotions, guys. This is not like, however you define your identity, like, you don't need to conform to the idea that like, oh, this is for girls because because it's like, it's dresses and romanticism. It's like, obviously people, if guys didn't like those things too, the human race probably wouldn't be existing right now. So.
Yeah, and I will say that before I started to, explore sort of where I stand with my identity, I was very much in favor, and I'm still in favor of this, of pushing against the narrative that just because you're a guy that you shouldn't fully embrace stuff like this. I did a stream with AR about this very topic, about the fact that, dare yourself to, to be open to exploring your emotions, and it's okay to like open your heart to, enjoying a good romantic film, uh, you don't have to shut yourself off from that. And I still, agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly. Some people it's hard to get them on board with it, but I still believe that with all my heart.
And honestly, this is overall, this is just the magic of movies. Movies that can make you empathize and identify with characters who are like you and with characters who are not like you, at their best. And this movie, I think, does so with quite a amount of elegance and beauty and grace, as best exemplified by this scene. Because again, I just find it's one of my favorite movie scenes ever. And yeah, the music, Patrick Doyle, man, because it's notable. He actually composes a couple different pieces for this sequence. In addition to the iconic "Who Is She" track, he composes, I think, like 3 separate waltzes. It's the La Valse de l'Amour, La Valse, like, so. Essentially, the "Who Is She" is the track that leads right into Ellen the Kit's first meeting or on the dance floor, and then it's La Valse de l'Amour is their actual dance, and then the more peppy second dance that they jump into is La Valse Champagne. And then there are a couple of polkas later that are actually, but so it's not just the one track, but obviously Who Is She is the headliner. They're all in quick succession.
I didn't realize that. I am reading this right now. I did not realize that he had written those waltzes. I just assumed that they were, tapes on some traditional waltzes, but the fact that he composed them is just even more amazing. God, he's so brilliant.
Yeah. No, this was one of those things where it's like I was on one hand like outraged that he didn't get an original score nomination, but then I look at the scores that got nominated in 2015, and I'm like, that's one of the best years ever for the category. I still would have put him in there, but it is like, honestly, yeah, it was that year. It was where is it? It was The Hateful Eight, Ennio Morricone. It was Bridge of Spies, Thomas Newman. It was Carter Burwell for Carol, which, oh my God, yes. Johan Johansson for Sicario, and John Williams for The Force Awakens. I still would have put Patrick Doyle in there, and I probably would have bumped out Thomas Newman because the man hasn't enough Oscar nominations, and Bridge of Spies is not one of my favorites of his, but again, all-time year for the category. And I can't really fault him giving the Oscar to Ennio Morricone. But
yeah, I don't think Ennio Morricone was ever gonna lose that Oscar. Like that was a year where thankfully, like it was a foregone conclusion, and happily so. Yeah, not going to argue with that, but still, I agree. The score should have been the people who vote in that category are a bit weird. It's like they do tend to vote for their favorites.
Patrick Doyle should have changed his name to Diane Warren, and then he would have gotten nominated.
Yeah, but yeah. So anyway, I think we did a good job on paying that scene its due. What follows after that is so great because, we talked earlier about them sort of expanding on the Cinderella story and realizing kind of how we progressed, and maybe it would be a good idea for the the characters of Cinderella and the prince to know each other. And so they actually essentially get to go on a date, after the dance, where they leave everybody else behind. And This is one of those scenes where if this was Bridgerton, they'd be talking about how scandalous it is that the two of them went off alone together.
They had an absolutely scandalous and salacious swing ride in the secret garden.
Oh, but again, we accept these things in fairy tales, so it's perfectly fine. It's a nice, innocent little date.
Yeah. No. God, and it's honestly like the connections between the characters in this scene with a beautifully understated piece of music, again from Patrick Doyle, called "The Secret Garden." Like, this is really like, if the ball scene was their cute big moment to fall in love, like this is the smaller, like moment after that where they fall even deeper for one another. Like, first of all, with the knowledge, again, it starts off humorous with the whole like, so you're the prince, and he's like, so you're not an apprentice. He's like, I am an apprentice monarch, and he's like, clearly, I thought that I'm clearly you were hiding your identity as a princess and didn't want to overawe a plain soldier. No more secrets, but they still have a few. Because in this scene, we learn, the prince confesses to Ella that, his father wants him to marry for advantage. And she's like, well, perhaps he'll change his mind. And then he reveals to her what he's revealed to no one else. I fear he hasn't had much time to do so. And Ella, of course, her heart goes out to him because she knows what that's like to lose a parent that you're about to love so deeply. But then in the moment when they're together in the secret garden and they have that little playful exchange, oh, hey, I want to know what you think, Bell.
Hi, great to see you.
Yep, come back and listen later. It's we're having a lot of fun discussing this. But like in that little playful dynamic where he's like, I've never shown this to anyone, and then he invites her to take a ride on the street, and she's like, I shouldn't, you should. I shouldn't, you should. I will. You're just like, they're already like, they already have their rapport and their little banter. And honestly, if this isn't the most gorgeously romantic little swing ride that I've ever seen in a movie, I'm hard pressed to think of what else it would be. And then he finds the slipper, obviously, and this is just and puts it on her foot, so we'll know it'll fit later.
This is why, if the fairy godmother had appeared again in the story, I feel like Ella would be saying, "What's with these slippers? They come off really easy."
Made of glass, and glass is notoriously slippery. So, I guess.
But oh God, it's just so absolute. It's great just to foreshadowing the end of the movie, obviously, when he's going to be putting the slipper on, but also it's like it just there's this great, I don't know how to put it exactly. There's just this magic of seeing it right here at this point in the movie, because at the end of the movie, it's almost an afterthought where it's like, it's not even really important by this point. So like, it becomes not so much a, will it fit? It's, we already know it does. And so, it's just, oh God, I'm just beaming thinking about the scene, because I'm thinking about which, by the way, to allow myself to be really superficial for a moment, these are two absolutely gorgeous people. And so just watching them smile at each other, it's like, it just makes you feel all warm and fuzzy, because they are just, it's everything. It's the fact that they're both extraordinarily beautiful. Their chemistry is off the charts. It's just like, it's one of those things where I think we're allowed to be superficial, because it just makes it's just, but also they're so already so deep, there's such a connection between the two of them. It's just like, this is the way love in the movies should be.
It works so brilliantly because it works on multiple levels. Like, we're gushing about the themes and the performances and the characters and like how the authentic emotional connection. But there is, again, talking about not judging yourself, there is absolutely nothing wrong with celebrating the simple concept of two hot people being hot together, and that is 1000% what is happening here with Lily James and Richard Madden. Because again, I don't know how they didn't fall in love on this movie. Clearly they did a little bit, but like, this is one of those things where it's like, if I were Richard Madden and I'd been acting in this movie, I might have gotten down and proposed to Lily James for real right then and there.
Oh god. The only thing that I will say about this one, and only thing about, is I have a bit of resistance to the Snow White thing, only because of the way the dwarves are being handled. I'm not crazy about the sort of CGI overkill there. I don't know how I'm going to feel about that, but I also want to really support Rachel Ziegler, and and I hate all the hate that she's gotten. So I don't know. We'll see how it turns out. But and also, I'm a much bigger fan of the original Snow White than I am of the original Cinderella. So even though I acknowledge that it has, it's of its time, as you would expect with a movie from like, it's either 1937 or 1939, one of those. But yeah, we'll see how it turns out. And you got Gal Gadot as the evil queen. that alone will be fun to see. So
I just hope the movie gets a fair shake on its merits, because again, it's facing a lot of hate online right now for reasons that I do not think are valid, related to its star. And
yeah, I will say that's definitely a larger conversation to be had, where I think on the one hand, I want to champion it to fight back against all that, but at the same time, it becomes difficult to have actual discussions about things that you maybe aren't crazy about, in the movie, because then that becomes fuel to the bad faith actors, and so that's the kind of the conflict that exists now with stuff like this. So honestly, as far as I'm concerned, if I do end up going to see it in theaters, I'll just take it in on my own, and my plan is to ignore everything else.
Which is wise, because again, like, it's echoing a lot of what happened with the 2023 Little Mermaid, which I actually thought was really, really good, and I thought Halle Bailey was excellent. And I was happy that movie at least did manage to overcome a lot of that, cultural nonsense. But obviously, it should never had to deal with it in the first place, and this movie shouldn't have either. Not having seen it, I'm not. I'm cautious about it, just because, again, I also have a lot of affection for the original 1937. But again, tying it to this movie, like, one of the reasons I will always try to go on into these Disney live action remakes with an open mind, and see what awaits, is because this movie, delivered on such an incredibly high level, that it proved to me that it is possible to tell an updated version of the story.
Yeah. No, and I do agree with the sentiments you've expressed in the past, that I think that this is kind of stands up as the best effort in that regard. And maybe it's because they felt free to, abandon the fact that it's not a musical, for instance, and they just sort of let it be its own unique thing. And yeah. So anyway, carrying on. So midnight does strike, and and Ella makes a run for it when she realizes that, counter to what she thought, it actually was not more than enough time. Um, but again, I want to touch on that beautiful moment between her and the king when she, sort of rushes into him and she talks about how amazing, amazing of a son he has, and that he loves you so very, very much. And it's just her words combined with her charm and that spark that she has. You just immediately, like, as with anybody, wows the king and really makes him think. For a second, it's like, yeah, and anybody that she runs into, except apparently, evil stepmothers and sisters, are going to be charmed by her, and it's her inherent goodness, and I think makes an impression. It's a beautiful moment.
It's incredible, and it leads into the thrilling chase sequence. This movie doesn't have a lot of traditional action sequences, but this is probably the closest. But even the lead up to it, like as she's racing down the stairs and losing the slipper, and the prince is chasing after her, and then she races into the carriage and races off, and the prince, just as he stops and calls for his horse, and the Grand Duke's like, no, this is some intrigue to lure you from the palace, and so he goes off to chase her, but then we get the
which again, like, it's one of those things, like, as a viewer with our sort of biases of who we're like, oh, get off it. But then if you look at it objectively, actually the Grand Duke is absolutely right. That is a danger, and
it is,
and like that's actually a good decision. And so it's again one of those things where, like, we don't like the Grand Duke because we're invested in the love story in this movie, and he's a dick, but also he makes actually sound, like, decisions from the perspective of protecting the kingdom.
Yeah. Which is again why even though he is an antagonist in this movie, I do not consider him evil or wicked, and I think that ultimately you can argue that he's trying to do the right thing, even though he again goes about it the wrong way. But in particular, the moment I really want to highlight before we get into the chase sequence is the moment when after the Grand Duke rushes off, we get the captain, Nonso Anozie, who I feel like we have not praised enough because he's just such a true, right-handed man. But he's like, I was having a grand old time. You had to go and choose that one, didn't you? And just the absolute radiant smile on Richard Madden's kid's face when he's like, yes, I did. Oh, yes, he did, indeed. How could you not?
Yeah, just pausing for a second, as you say, just to praise Nonso Anozie. He's just, like, I think he's actually one of the underappreciated elements of season 2 of Game of Thrones. As Zorro, because he actually is really a different character from the book, and he's so great in that. He has a little role in Atonement, which was the first thing I saw him in, and he's just full charm in this movie. Like, he is a perfect, like, companion for the prince, and not to skip too far ahead, but I love his line near the end of the film when he says, "Then has your cat learned to sing?"
My God, you get the sense that he and the prince, like, they, even though he's older, obviously, it's like they have a true bond. They're real friends, in addition to him being like his protector. There's the great scene where they're dueling in the swords in the arena, and the captain is not afraid to best the prince, and tease him for it. Again, this is where he mentions his head's been turned. But then as the kid he can't stop talking about how wonderful Ella is. The captain's like, you don't suppose she has a sister, do you? And you're like, that's a great line, because that's what we would be asking. It's also like, yeah, kind of she does. I actually don't think you want to meet them, though.
No, he's so great. Yeah. It's...
And I should know he's a completely original character. He is not in the animated movie, so they created him whole cloth, and then cast an actor who you would not always think of in a medieval fantasy as being an actor you would see. But it's like, but this is a fantasy world, so it should be. And that's actually another thing I wanted to talk about with the ball sequence briefly. Was they talk about in the behind the scenes? They're like, they made very big efforts. They're like, we want this to be diverse and inclusive, so we're going to have people from all walks, all cultures. We're going to have people from like Japanese cultures and Middle Eastern cultures and African cultures and Latin American cultures. Like, everyone's going to be at the ball, and we're going to give them costumes in keeping with their traditional styles, because we can do that in a fantasy story.
Yeah, and this was, I feel this was just still a couple years before things started to get really heated with that type of thing, with because we were still in the tail end of the Obama administration, if you can believe it. So so even though all of that stuff, all the horrible stuff was definitely simmering and ready to explode, it wasn't necessarily, part of the main conversation yet. And so, or maybe I just wasn't paying attention to it, because I feel like all those people would have been complaining about what this movie would probably have been Nonso's character. And it's, although, to be fair, actually, we were here getting the first wave of it this year with The Force Awakens, and the character of Finn. So, but that's another discussion. We'll maybe save for when we get to The Force Awakens. But no, it's nice to see, even though, you could argue maybe they could have been a bit more progressive in their casting, maybe have more of the leads be a more diverse cast. But I wouldn't give up the pairing of Lily James and Richard Madden for anything. So, it's, as Disney has gone on, at least maybe until some changes recently, it started to get a bit more forward looking in that department. But I don't want to get into that whole thing. We could have a whole different discussion. But needless to say, they were making, at least attempting to make some strides here in that regard.
And I will also just say, again, if you want to see the leads of a story like this, you go back and watch the 1997 Rodgers and Hammerstein, which featured, a black woman in Brandy Norwood as Cinderella, and a Hispanic man as Pablo Montalban as the prince, and Whoopi Goldberg, and Whitney Houston, and it's a wonderful cast. Hi, Cassie.
Which, by the way, on like a somewhat similar note, I do want to, although it's kind of off topic, but I did want to voice how happy it made me at the Oscars last week. I loved that when they had the opening of the show with Wicked, and having both sorry, my mind's going blank. This is where we get to the part in the stream where I can't remember anybody's name. Where they had Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande get on stage. I love the fact that not only did they have a musical number from The Wizard of Oz and Wicked, but also The Wiz which felt like such a beautiful acknowledgement, you know, of that film, which I feel like, and full disclosure, I actually haven't seen it, but I'm very much aware of it and the sort of cultural impact that it had. But I thought that was a great recognition that maybe would not necessarily have been the first thing that people would have thought of for doing that. So I thought that was really great that they thought to include that, you know, as an important touchstone in sort of the evolution of the story of the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, no, it was a wonderful performance and a really good ceremony, I thought, with the right intentionality behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously Cynthia Erivo, like, God, just hit those vocals live. That was incredible.
That was so great. Yeah, I mean, I think though my favorite part of that whole number though was when they cut to Ariana Grande just watching her. There was so much love and affection there, and it just made me feel the warm fuzzies inside.
Yeah, and since Cassie's in the chat, she had mentioned last week about Gelfie being at least one-sided canon. I'm like, that tracks with this scene.
Oh God. Anyway, so getting back.
Yeah, so I mean, I think if we wanted to pick up the pace, we could probably say that like the chase scene is just fun. Like the racing from the palace. They turn it into the movie's kind of big action sequence, and it actually is quite thrilling because like there's the moment where Cinderella's carriage almost goes over the cliff and the bell is tolling, and the riders are chasing them, and it's, even though it's like part of it's like, no, go back, go back to the prince, but it was also like we do want her to get away in this moment because obviously what the thing is, she is worried at this moment that if they find out who she really is, then not only will she not get to be with Kit, then, something worse might happen to her. And she's just grateful for the moment that she had with him. She's not necessarily seeking more. But obviously, like, it's, the Grand Duke, is trying to stop her because he's like, we need to, there still needs to be a way for me to, save this political marriage to the Princess Selena of Zaragoza. So this woman is a wild card who needs to be taken off the table. And of course, Lady Tremaine is going to help him do that. But the sequence itself is, like, I just find it really exciting and fun. The case for the carriage.
Yeah, speaking of speaking of Lady Tremaine, she clocks Ella actually pretty early on, just watching her reactions to their discussion about the ball. And Ella tried to contain your your delight a bit. But which then will lead to the moment where she's upstairs and holding the slipper. But the thing that I love most about that scene when they're talking about the ball and then talking about the mysterious, the mysterious princess and mystery princess, despite everything that they're saying and casting such a like negative light on it, she's not paying attention to any of that.
Yeah,
because she knows the truth of what happened, that night, and she is just in her own wonderful sort of like dream state of just thinking about it, and you're right, she's not expecting for anything more to come of it. It's just she was just so happy to get to experience it, and none of what they're saying will douse her memories of it at all. As a matter of fact, when she goes upstairs, she says she's writing everything down so that she'll be able to remember it.
Yeah.
And again, like Ella's wonderful spirit. It's just such a highlight of this film. And it's just so beautiful before, before before her stepmother finds a way to stomp on it again.
Quite literally, in the fact that she finds the glass slipper and shatters it, which again is another change from the way that it's approached in the animated movie, where the stepmother basically just locks her in the attic when they arrive. But like it's here that like the stepmother knows that Ella is the mystery princess. She has figured it out, and she recognizes that like if the prince ever comes into contact with her again, like it's over for for her and for her daughters, and for and Ella will be off to wed and become the queen. So but it's telling that like rather than try to stop that entirely, at first she tries to blackmail Cinderella. She basically like, all right, I, being the generous spirit and who has always, looked out for your best interests, I will introduce you and I will vouch for you, and you will be able to have everything your heart desire and wed the prince. And when you do, you will make me the head of the royal household, and we will marry off Anastasia and Gisela to wealthy lords, and I will manage that boy. And it's very telling that Cinderella, even though she loves the prince and wants to be with him, this is a deal she will not take because she knows what it's about. And so she says, I know I could not save my father from you, but I will protect the kingdom and I will protect the prince. And that is something Lady Tremaine was not expecting, because again, she's constantly underestimating the strength of Ella's spirit.
Yeah, because to her, someone who will always look for what's most advantageous to her, that concept of someone being selfless just doesn't, she can't understand that. But then that's just another, further proof that, as she says, because, you're so young and good, it's just another sort of brick onto that. And it's, I think it just didn't, it infuriates her all the more, not just because she won't get what she wants, but also because it shows the strength and goodness of Ella even more, and that it allows her to be even more bitter. Yeah. But so then what's going on at the same time as all of this is stuff that, we've talked about, how, there's that beautiful scene with the prince and, and his father, which then results in the prince putting out the call saying that he's, looking for the mystery girl, and that he demands that all effort be spent looking for her, even as the Grand Duke tries to maneuver him into, taking the marriage deal with the princess. And of course, what's great about this is, and again, I don't know quite how he pulls this off, but again, it's a fantasy. I'm willing to go with it. The prince, in secret, incognito, is actually, going along with them as they, hunt for the girl. And you're like, yeah, who's watching after the kingdom? But we'll just go with it. But the Grand Duke has obviously talked at this point with with the evil stepmother, and and they're plotting and planning, and she's made a deal for her daughters to be taken care of and for her to be taken care of, and she's like, I don't care what you do with Ella.
Which is actually, I find it really interesting how Cate Blanchett plays that moment, because like obviously from her actions it's clear that like she's treating Ella cruelly and abysmally, but like in that scene where he's like, and what of the girl, and you can see her, you're like, oh, do with you what you will, she's nothing to me. And I don't know if that was the intentionality of the script, but the way Cate Blanchett plays it almost makes you feel like she knows what she's doing is terrible and is like kind of hating herself a little bit for it. She's still going to do it. But it's like, again, this is her not being a soulless monster. Like, she recognizes what she is doing is evil. And the fact that like she is like struggling with it a little bit is what humanizes her.
Yeah, but we do get some comic relief along the way on this journey to find Ella, just with all the different ways the different women are trying to fit into the slipper. I love that, one of them oils up their foot, and then we get like, these women who very clearly were not the ones at the ball, but I just, hilarity ensues.
Yeah, it's broad comedy, but it works for me because it's like done at a fast, fun pace. And speaking of comedy in this scene, I will just take a brief moment to shout at an actor we have not mentioned, who is very much a comedic character, which is the royal crier played by Alex McQueen. Who, like, oh my god, anytime this guy has to speak, like, he just here yay, here yay. Yeah, yay. Like the way
he is not happy in his work.
No. No, like the fact, like we like in the ball scene when he's having to introduce all these ridiculous, long, complicated names, and the reason he doesn't announce Ella is he was out of breath from having announced the Princess Bloodwind of a little and you're just like, this poor guy needs to find another line of work.
Speaking of people we didn't mention, I'm gonna jump back, and we didn't get a chance to mention Rob Brydon as
I'm so
Master Phineas, the royal painter, which he only has one scene, but he's really funny.
He is hysterical. Famous comedian, obviously, so it tracks. But like the fact that he is like another person who like is clearly like not very happy with his lot of just being like, I will try, but I can't work miracles. It's like, and he's like, it's a lovely canvas. Thank you, as if he knows anything about art. When he gets dumped on the ground, or he's like when they're like. Or when he's like, yes, I say if this is a step in the right direction myself. We didn't ask you. You're kind of overstepping your bounds here. But then when he's on the ground, he's like, actually, this is a very good angle for you. So, can I have a longer brush? Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned him, because it's a one scene performance. But again, this movie can just has some, like, in addition to being sweepingly romantic and dramatic, it's also really damn funny at times.
Yeah. So let's just cut to the chase and get to the beautiful, not quite the final scene, but but for all intents and purposes, this is just going to be another one of those times when I just gush about the amount of sighing I was doing, and like, just because obviously there's the comedy of the stepsisters trying to fit into the slipper, which doesn't go as planned, and and so they're getting ready to leave. The Grand Duke just wants to make this. They had to make this stop because it's like they were ordered to go to leave no stone unturned, but it is the last place because he wants to make sure that everybody's just exhausted by this point. They get in, they get out, and that's it. But thanks to Ella's beautiful voice and the help of the mice.
Yes.
She starts singing the song that her mother sang for her, Lavender Blue. And this is like, again, it's a sort of a crime that this iteration of the song isn't on the soundtrack.
Yeah.
because it's such a key part of the film. But that just means we get to enjoy it when we watch the actual movie. Just the way her voice rings out, you know, from the house and just stops everybody in their tracks. And again, you know, just Nonso and Anozie as the captain, just going, "Madam, are you sure there isn't another maid in in the house?" And she's like, "Oh no." Then has your cat learned to sing? And of course she tries to laugh that off, and the Grand Duke is like, come on, enough silliness. Let's be off. And he's like, but she is clearly lying, my lord. And which, can I just say, that sort of, I love when characters get a chance to call out actual bullshit, which is something that unfortunately we seldom get to see in real life. So it's just so satisfying when we see that in cinema. And then when the Grand Duke continues to say, "We're leaving," and that is when the prince unveils himself. And this is like right up there with those. This is sort of reveals like we get in A Knight's Tale when the Black Prince, reveals himself in that. And it's just like one of those fist pumping moments. Yes. And yeah, and meanwhile we're still hearing, the singing in the background. It's just, again, the music in this film just absolutely amazing. And then we get the captain goes up to, ask Ella to come down, and there's just that one last, attempt by the stepmother, just, and she's like, just don't forget what you are. And it's just like, it's so cruel, but by this point Ella just doesn't even care. She doesn't have any more power over her at this point.
It's watching the stepmother get taken down like peg by peg by peg by peg in this sequence is so satisfying. Because, as you said, first they catch her in the lie about the other young woman in the house. Then she tries to play it off as that Ella's just a servant girl and loses on that. And then when the captain says you're required to present yourself to your king, she's like, I forbid you to do this. And he just gets to absolutely snap at her. And I forbid you to forbid her. Who are you to deny an officer of the king? Are you an empress, a saint, a deity? And she plays the last card that she thinks she has left. I am her mother. And then Lily James' Ella gets to deliver one of the first of her two absolute hammer lines that just literally put the nail in the coffin, so to speak, on this relationship. You are not, and you never will be, my mother. You could have been, if you had actually had the courage to be kind. Ella would have opened her heart to Lady Tremaine, but Lady Tremaine never gave her that chance. And while Ella is always willing to extend kindness to anyone, this is the sequence, this makes it absolutely clear to anyone who may have been thinking otherwise. She is no fool. She knew that Lady Tremaine was rotten to the core in this way, but she wanted to believe better and was trying to extend a better hand. And in this moment, she recognizes that I can be kind to you up to as much as I can, but if you will not show reciprocal kindness, then I will not hurt you. I will not, punish you. But I am done with you. You have lost your chance here. And of course, we'll get to the absolute hammer line in a few minutes, but this is where Ella's real strength is being shown, and why she is, she doesn't need to duel Lady Tremaine with a sword here for us to know that she is in the right and that she has won.
Yeah. Oh God. And I did. This feels like another opportunity to just praise Lily James to high heaven. Just her performance is so amazing. Um, and yeah, that's and yeah, I really want to talk about the final line, but let's talk about just her going downstairs and her interaction with Kit
And just before that, there's just one moment, that beautiful moment that I've appreciated more and more on rewatches, which is another bit of narration from the fairy godmother when, as the music starts to softly play and she takes a moment to look in the mirror, and the narration, would who she was, who she really was, be enough? There was no magic to help her this time. This is perhaps the greatest risk that any of us will take, to be seen as we truly are. And the reason that this sequence is so incredibly powerful is because, like, we know that Ella, even though she doesn't have the magic, she has her superpower, she has her kindness, and she has her connection with Kit. And so, as incredibly, even though the movie plays up the tension, what makes it so glorious is the inevitability of it, because we know, she knows, he knows.
There's a version of this scene that could have gone with, but they wouldn't do that because it's part of, they have to deliver on it. But I could have seen the scene playing with them just tossing the slipper to the side because it didn't even matter. But you have to have the actual act of it. So I'm fine with it. But yeah, just the way they're looking at each other and just, again, just the way they smile at each other, the pure chemistry between the two of them. It's just, oh God.
Yeah. And the dialogue and the writing in this sequence, like so many callbacks to all their relationship that has been built authentically through the course of the movie. When, again, she enters the room and we see Kit turn around and he smiles because, again, rather than play with magic, like, he can see it's her, he knows it's her, but he still asks you, because he still has not gotten her name, who are you? Who are you, this woman who I've fallen so deeply in love with? And she, for the first time, owns the moniker that was given to her in hate and ridicule. I am Cinderella. Your Majesty, I'm no princess. I have no carriage, no parents, no dowry. I do not even know if that beautiful slipper will fit. But if it does, will you take me as I am, an honest country girl who loves you? And just the way that Richard Madden's Kit, like, almost is sighing as he says, of course I will. But only if you will take me as I am, an apprentice still learning his trade.
It has the same energy as Ewan McGregor up on stage when being asked again, are you going to play Obi-Wan Kenobi again? And he goes, yes. Same energy.
Exactly. Oh, man.
But, oh, God.
Yeah.
So amazing. And then
the formality of the slipper. Yeah.
I do love the fact that she says, I do not even know if that slipper will fit, because, hey, maybe it was part of the magic.
Yeah.
But the fact that it doesn't matter, like, say for some bizarre reason it didn't fit, it's not like the whole thing would have been called off. It would have been like, oh, who cares? But yeah, and then the reverie is broken for a moment as the stepsisters come running down, realizing that they should now beg for forgiveness. Yeah. Essentially, little good though it will do them.
No. I mean, they to their credit, they acknowledge when they're beaten, but they're very minimal credit. But Ella almost doesn't even notice them as she and Kit take hands, shall we, and walk out. But the one character she will still notice is Lady Tremaine, who is standing up on the staircase, stricken by like have everything that she thought she had, so close, is now tumbled through her fingers because she was, cruel and, not courageous and cowardly, the opposite of being courageous and kind. And Ella in this moment has won. She has all the power. She could say, this woman horribly mistreated me, arrest her, banish her, kick her out of this house, but that is not who Ella is, and in this moment, she does the most magnanimous, but also the most cutting thing that she could do to this woman in this moment. I forgive you. And the way that Wade Tremaine just crumples after hearing that, like, again, great moment from Cate Blanchett there, and a phenomenal acting from Lily James. I'm just like it's a simple moment, but just you feel it like the stroke of a hammer, coming down or striking the bell, like for whom the bell tolls here, because this is like Ella. Well, again, Ella did not need to pick up a sword to win and be a hero here. Like, she won by fighting her way, by having courage and being kind, and now she gets to have her happy ending. And Lady Tremaine and her daughters will be. It's implied, that they're maybe the prince like gave him something of a golden parachute. Like, look, we're not gonna let bygones be bygones, but like, just go away. just go away. Like, we're not gonna like throw you in prison or anything for this, but just leave, please. I think the captain probably took personal relish in escorting them to their ship or the border, wherever they're bound. But this, but Ella has said her piece, and now she need never, have their paths cross again.
Yeah, and the same goes for the Grand Duke, who is also told to leave.
Yeah. You know what? They deserve each other.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, then just the glorious, really final scene of the two of them, king and queen, going out onto the balcony together. And I just talk about swooning. I just love when, he calls her my queen, and she says my kit. Oh God.
No, so like their interactions in this scene are just so sweet and so them, like when they're joking about the portraits, and like he's like, we must have a portrait of you painted, because she's, no one's ever painted my portrait. It's like, oh no, I do hate myself in paintings. Be kind even to yourself, Elle, and have courage, and all will be well. And the line that I love.
By the way, sorry, I'm not buying that for a second.
Oh no.
Yeah, like. Sorry, you don't come up on portraits bullshit.
Yeah. Where's Master Phineas? Get him back here. Get him on Ella's portrait forthwith. But the line that I love the most from the sequence is as they're holding hands and walking out. When Ella asks him, "Are you ready?" and he just looks at her and smiles and says, "For anything, as long as it's with you." And then the my queen, my kit, and the adoring crowd, and the mice are there, and the Mr. Goose is there, and it's just, this is the big sweeping happy fairy tale ending that we have all been craving, and here we're getting it. And then, of course, the fairy godmother has her final word on the situation, where she confirms that even though we won't get to see it, because I don't think this movie's getting a sequel and doesn't need one, where she's just like, and so Ella and Kit were married, and I can tell you as her fairy godmother that they were counted among the wisest and most beloved monarchs the kingdom had ever known. And Ella continued to see the world not as it is, but as it could be. If only you believe in courage and kindness, and occasionally just a little bit of magic. And I'm almost getting teared up just saying that, because it's just like, again, this movie makes you want to believe these things are possible, and they can be. They can be if you are willing to be as courageous and brave as Ella and Kit have been. and is kind. And then
Yeah, because, well, and to sort of again pull back and sort of how this applies to the real world, I've always said that, like, and again, the people for whom they like their movies, to be more quote unquote realistic, and and don't subscribe to sort of this kind of idealized happiness and romance and magic and whatnot. I've always felt that it's actually really easy to give into cynicism. It takes a lot more inner strength to believe in, to have hope, and to believe in uh you know to have courage and kindness, and to believe in those things. It's not easy, especially in our world, so yeah, for me, I will always hang on to those things. And yeah, and it's just such a beautiful ending to a beautiful film.
No, one of my favorite endings ever, fitting because again, this is one of my favorite movies. And and we get the traditional, the end with the fairy godmother in the clouds. And honestly, like even though sometimes this movie has had a very classical, sweeping orchestral score, I will just note that even though it maybe breaks the tone a little bit, I adore the music, the song that plays over the credits. I
thought it tonally fit for me.
It does.
I would, if you ask me, I would actually always prefer just to have like a grand sweeping like suite of orchestral highlights from the film, but it works. It fit. And I've had a whole movie of of exactly the kind of music that I love. So I'm just, so long as it's not like jarring, I'll go ahead and allow the people who want their their pop song, I'll let them take it, especially because it's capped off by new renditions of two songs from the original animated version.
Yes.
So,
which again, like the movie did not include those in the main body of the text of the film itself. Although we got a couple of nods, like Cinderella sings a few bars of "Sing Sweet, Sweet Nightingale" in the film, and she obviously has her lavender blue dilly dilly. But this is so I'll just say the song I'm referring to is called "Strong" by Sana Rel, which it was written for this movie, and obviously the lyrics are very evocative of it, where the refrain is "Trust in your heart, and your sun shines forever and ever. Hold fast to kindness, your light shines forever and ever. I believe in you and me, we are strong." And again, it's very in keeping with the themes of the movie. And then it plays into Lily James doing an absolutely gorgeous rendition of "A Dream Is Your Wish Your Heart Makes," which retroactively I was like, I kind of wish this had been in the movie, but even though ultimately I think the movie's pretty perfect, because like this is an iconic song and Lily James fucking crushes it.
yeah, and then that transitions then into "Bippity Boppity Boo," sung by Helena Bonham Carter, which is great.
Yep, and she gets the amusing little joke at the end of like, as the credits truly fade to black, "Where did everybody go?" Which is so yeah, I like this is I always try to stay through the credits of any movie that I watch. This is a movie where I will always watch the credits because I just want to stay in its vibe a little bit longer.
Oh god. I wonder if this is, we don't often like finish off our conversation by delving to the very end of the end credits, but but yeah, that's fitting. No, I just I've come to absolutely love this movie, and obviously I had a great time watching it when we did the watch party, but getting to revisit it today was beautiful. And I know I'll be revisiting it again when I get the 4K, in about a week. And I'll be listening to the the soundtrack CD over again. And I think that this is one that has just only begun its sort of life as a favorite of mine. So, and I have you to thank for that. Although I will say, like, this was also one of those that I had been waiting a while for it to come onto Disney Plus, because I did want to see it. So I felt like me getting to see it was a couple of years in the making. So, but just the fact that it had your ringing endorsement just made me all the more excited for when it eventually arrived on the platform. And then we celebrated that by doing a watch party. And it was one of those where I actually had always planned to go ahead and purchase it for myself, but for some reason I was putting it off, and now, since after I watched it today, I was like, okay, enough playing around. I want to own both the movie and the soundtrack. So yeah, so happy to have taken care of that today and to have had this wonderful conversation about it.
I'm so glad and so thankful that not only did you finally, watch the movie a couple of years ago, but that you loved it as much as you did, and that you've agreed to discuss it on the channel, because it is a movie that, as I said, is special to me. And is a movie that is a touchstone for me in terms of, like movies that make me, that I will go to when I need that source of inspiration and sense of hope. And I feel, again, weirdly, I feel some kind of, it is almost my duty whenever, to promote this movie to as many people as I can. Not as obnoxiously, but just like the idea that, like, if you think this movie is something like cynical or like a corporate redux of one of their beloved properties, like, it's not. It's so much more than that. Please give it a chance.
And I'll be completely blunt. My opinion of 99% of these Disney live action remakes is that they are sort of soulless, corporate, products of, like, they exist because Disney realizes that it's easier just to continually regurgitate, their old properties and their old classic films into new versions. They've got a built-in audience, so they know they're going to make money off of it. And they're taking things that were meant to be animated and transferring them over into the quote unquote live action realm. And it's not always really live action. It's like, I have numerous complaints about the Lion King movies that they've done. But in fairness, I haven't seen most of these films. But it's just because their existence is very rarely justified to me. And I see the energy behind it as being, just, again, soulless. But there are always exceptions to that. And this has always been one of the films that I wanted to see. I just had never gotten around to it for years. And I kind of looked at it as something that you've said a couple times with regards to a movie that was one of our favorites last year, which was The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, which may have originated from a sort of company mandate of, we need a movie to be made so we can hold on to the copyright. So not exactly the same thing, but kind of in a similar vein. But the end result ended up being that if that's all they needed, as you've said, the filmmakers didn't have to go that hard.
Yeah.
And so something that may have been birthed out of a corporate need to fill a quota ended up being a really beautiful and interesting piece of art. And so I feel the same way about this. Its origins may have been, and to be fair, this was early enough in the process that it wasn't necessarily, it's not the same thing as nowadays where it's just like, let's chug another one out. This was still fairly early in the run of doing these quote unquote, reimaginings or reinterpretations, to where I think there was still a desire to kind of figure out what they wanted to do with it, which is why, like, this isn't a musical and this does some different things, and this is unique in its own way. I think the film that Kenneth Branagh made with all his collaborators, with the cast, the crew, was so much more than what it needed to be for what Disney probably wanted. And that's the thing. It doesn't really, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that much what the origins of something is, if what gets created and put out into the world is something that has creativity and passion and just beauty. It, like, that makes it worth it, even if its beginnings may not have been, even those initial intentions from the company may not have been focused on the art and more on commerce. The fact of the matter is that what we got is a beautiful, beautiful film. And I think just one of Disney's greatest achievements out of the past, I'd argue out of this entire, the entire 2000s, honestly. I think it's one of their best things. So yeah, at the end of the day, that's all that matters to me. And I think this is a beautiful work of art.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is ultimately the work that matters, and it is the passion of the artists and the people who make these films that is what matters. Because for every movie that is set out to be made, like the directors and the cast, they want to do a good job, but you can tell sometimes when the people who are making the story really, really believe in it. And like when you listen to Kenneth Branagh talk about the Cinderella story, he's obviously most famous for doing a lot of, Shakespeare adaptations and things along those lines, in addition to his own work. And he's he's like obviously one of our great living filmmakers, but you can tell like this is not a movie he made for a paycheck. He wanted to make this movie. He loves this story. And that passion comes out in his behind the scenes interviews. And when he talks about, he really wanted to, bring this story to a new generation and make what he's called the definitive version of the Cinderella story. And to my mind, he did it. Again, this is my favorite version of the Cinderella story I have ever seen in any medium, whether it's, movies, TV, theater, books, it's because the passion was just there, and the alchemy of bringing these actors and these creative people together, it just worked, all under Kenneth Branagh's, very steady hand. And whether or not, even if, Disney, ultimately was making, wanted to make this movie because they thought, it would, make the money, like, surprise, movies are a business. And this movie did make money. It was very financially successful. But again, I'm so glad you brought up The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, because it is a case where it's like the artists, the vision behind, like the artists who were making this had a vision, and they worked like hell to deliver that vision. And what they created was a work of true magic. And so to cite like another, phrase that's often cited in different, things about movie discourse, cynically, especially with these types of movies, like the phrase that we despise, nobody asked for this. I would have said, like, a few years before this movie came out, if somebody had asked me, do you want a live action version of Cinderella? I might have said, like, no, I don't really think we need one. But when I started to hear about the cast and the creative team behind it, I got very sincerely excited for it. And now that it's out in the world, I'm like, yes, I'm so glad that they chose to make this story, because they had a vision, and they promoted it, and they elevated it, and now whatever happens going forward with these Disney live action remakes, we will always have this. This is, for me, the standard. Not just the best of the Disney live action remakes, but a great movie in and of its own right, and the best telling of the Cinderella story that I've ever seen. And so and for that reason alone, I think that I'm like, keep giving people chances to do something like this, because there may be a lot of misfires, or some where it's like, yes, that was a good effort, but it's not better than the original animated classic. But if once every 20 years or so you can get something like this, a movie of this beauty and astonishing achievement, then by all means keep swinging.
Yeah, although I will say Disney does need to swing back in the direction of making some more original content.
that I would agree, but maybe they can try to do both. They've got the money.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think my issue has ever been with them doing these projects, but relying solely on them is where I've had issues. Because hey, I was not upset to go see the live action remake of Beauty and the Beast. Beauty and the Beast is one of my favorite movies. So as soon as they announced it, I was like, yeah, I'm going to go see it, and so, yeah. And especially once the trailer for it came out, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be so much fun. So sometimes my love of the thing can override that cynicism, but in that case, the classic is still the original animated film, but I'm perfectly fine with both existing. So I think if there was a better balance of having that kind of stuff, but also more new original projects, I'd be more content. But we'll see how the future unfolds.
Yeah, and I will just want one other thing I want to kind of touch on within Cinderella's place within these live action Disney remakes is it is notable that so a couple of the movies that they made before this one were kind of more reimaginings of their classics. They did Alice in Wonderland was actually meant to be a sequel to the original. And then with Maleficent, obviously they completely flipped the perspective and made Maleficent the hero of the story instead. But
I do have to say, no matter what you think about those films, I have to say I've always felt that there could not be any more perfect casting than Angelina Jolie as Maleficent. She was so perfect as that character. I just so I just want to mention that because I was like, oh my God, that's absolutely perfect, especially once you saw her in costume and everything. It was like, that's that character.
No, I mean, they've done a great job of casting all these live action remakes. I've generally thought they're pretty spot on. But the thing, and some of the other ones that I think people have gotten a little bit more frustrated with or pushed back on are ones that essentially just tell almost exactly the same story. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons that Cinderella stands apart is because even though it is not a subversion of the original tale, it is telling the same classic story, a lot of what's present here is new and is fresh and is elevated and is not in the original animated movie. We had talked about everything with Cinderella and her mother, the very thematic, powerful core of the movie. That is new for this movie. Everything with the stepmother, everything with, the expanded relationship between Ella and Kit, the movie created all that within the context of the classic Cinderella story. And and if you want to say that oh, well, they should have just told an original story, then people might have called it a ripoff of Cinderella. But it's no, but in this case, it's there is power in the classic story, as the producers had said, everyone knows Cinderella, all cultures, all ages, because it connects with human beings on a profound level. And there was a great quote from Alison Shermer, the late Alison Shermer, I should note, one of the producers on this movie, who said, all girls around the world have what Cinderella has. They don't necessarily have a shield, a sword, a bow and arrow, but what they have is their inner fortitude, and they have a sense of themselves. And that's enough. And that is enough of a reason in my mind to tell this story again for a new generation, so that new, kids, as they come into this world and grow up, can have their own version of the story. And it does have to evolve with the times. And I think that this movie, I feel, is refreshingly modern in its approach, but it is not discarding the classic spirit of the original fairy tale. It is celebrating it. And that is one of the reasons, again, why I think that, maybe it was just lightning in a bottle. Maybe they'll never have anything like this again with these projects. But like whatever they did with this movie, it just worked, and they made something truly special.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah. Just like I said, I'm just going to repeat myself. Fantastic movie. I'm so glad, you introduced me to it a couple of years ago, and that we got to talk about it again, because I've been looking, not that I really needed one, but I've been looking for an excuse to watch it again. And yeah, and I will say that, I made sure to highlight it when talking about the music, but both time, well, not honestly, not only when I've sat down to watch the movie, but whenever I've listened to the soundtrack, I do get the Lavender Blue song just stuck in my head, where it just won't stop. Just keeps playing over and over, because it's so beautiful. And yeah, her singing it at the end of the movie is just like, it's such an emotional moment, and just creates just this feeling of just, being, not to be overly corny, I apologize, but just being lifted up in, in basically into the sky in the arms of love. Yeah, sorry, that was incredibly cheesy and corny, but that's just how it makes you feel. And so, yeah, I just, it's a movie that I just, it just makes my heart flutter in all the right ways. And I'm so glad that we got to wax poetic about it today.
It's a balm for the soul, as we said.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's it. I actually thought we were going to go shorter today. We did spend a lot of time on the ball scene, which I don't regret.
I regret nothing. Again, baby steps. We're coming off 2 nearly 5-hour streams, so I think bringing this one under 4 is a nice progression back hopefully towards a reasonable length. But again, I could have easily talked about this movie for 6 hours plus, but we're not going to do that. I think we've set our piece for now. We obviously love it.
Yeah, just thank you to everybody who stopped in, even if it was only for a couple minutes. We love you guys, and we appreciate all the support. Yeah. And I'll just say, since I fail to mention it 99% of the time, if you're watching this, after the fact, and it's your first time and you like what you've seen, please subscribe to the channel. We'd love to have you back. And next week we'll be talking about the James Bond film Casino Royale, starring Daniel Craig, and then the week after that we'll be talking about Andor season 1, and then we've got lots of fun stuff coming ahead in the future. So stay tuned, and yeah, I'm getting really excited, more so than I expected to be, about talking about Casino Royale next week. Because, like I said, it is one of my favorite James Bond movies, directed by the great Martin Campbell, who directed another one of my favorite James Bond movies, GoldenEye.
which we did a stream on, and we touched on that connection, and I'm very happy to be returning to that world, and looking forward to celebrating not just Daniel Craig, but one of the best Bond girls ever in Eva Green's Vesper Lind, and so that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I just love it. I'm the money, every penny of it. So great. They like talking about great chemistry. You know, we'll just be going, you know, talking about that off the charts chemistry between the two of them. Yeah. And yeah, so I guess that's it. But again, thank you all for watching tonight. Anything else you want to add, Jared?
No, I mean, I'll just say my piece from the, again, I love this movie. I love the message it sends. I find it, hopeful and optimistic and inspiring. And I really do, looking up to the character of Ella as I do try my very best to live up to the words that she lives her life by. Have courage, be kind, and if possible, I know it can be difficult, but if possible, try to see the world not as it is, but as it could be, with just a little bit of magic.
Yeah, it's what I like to try and live my life by these days. It gets a little bit difficult, but when I'm able to center myself and return to that place, it's when I feel most myself. So this was an excellent choice to watch and talk about today, so I could bring myself back to that place. And yeah, and just one final round of applause to everybody involved in this movie, from the director Kenneth Branagh to the cast, Lily James, Richard Madden, Cate Blanchett, so forth and so on, and everybody who just worked so hard to bring this movie to life, because it's a really good one. And yeah, so that's it. And yeah, we'll see you all next week. And again, as you just said, Jared, I'll just say farewell by saying, have courage and be kind. Bye.